Tonight we're venturing deep into the heart of Texas, where the highways stretch farther than the eye can see, and the silence out there carries stories you were never meant to hear. These aren't campfire tales or urban legends. These are 20 true Texas road trip horror stories that actually happened. From forgotten rest stops and abandoned motels to strange voices drifting across empty plains, every mile of Texas holds a secret. And some of them never stop following you home. But before we begin, there's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake. They leave without subscribing. And by doing that, they miss the creepiest, most spine-tingling tales that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button right now, because the road ahead is long, dark, and full of shadows that don't always stay behind you. So, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Tell me in the comments below. Because out here in Texas, when the night falls this quiet, you start to wonder if someone, somewhere, is listening too. Now buckle up. The highway is calling. Let's dive into the darkness and hear 20 true Texas road trip horror stories that actually happened. My name is Eric Malone, and I'm from Childress, Texas. I don't live there anymore, haven't in a long time, but I still think about that stretch of highway just west of town every time the wind picks up at night. You know the sound I mean, how? It rolls across the flat land and hums through the fence posts, steady as breathing. I was 34 back then, fresh out of rehab, trying to put my life together again. My brother had told me I could stay with him a while in Tucson, just until I found work and got my head straight. I'd been on the road all day, running on coffee and gas station peanuts, and I remember the sky was the color of old brass when I saw the sign for the rest stop. The sun had just dropped behind the plains, and the light had that pale, stretched look you only get in the Texas Panhandle. Beautiful in a lonely way. The place was empty except for one parked semi far down the lot. I pulled in, cut the engine, and just sat there a moment listening to it tick and settle. The wind was hot even after dark, carrying the smell of mesquite and diesel, and somewhere out there, crickets were going at it like 1,000 tiny clocks all out of time with each other. I took my thermos, had a sip of coffee, and thought about calling my brother to tell him I'd be late, but there was no service. So I went inside to use the bathroom before driving the last couple hours. The light in there buzzed like a bad transformer, flickering just enough to give you that uneasy feeling you're not alone. The floor was clean, but smelled like old mop water, and the mirrors had that cloudy film on them like smoke had been wiped away. I was standing at the sink when I heard someone come in, a slow shuffle, boots on tile, and then a soft humming. It was faint at first, but I recognized the tune right away. It was Tennessee Waltz. My ex-wife used to hum it without thinking, mostly when she was doing dishes or folding laundry. The sound of it made me freeze right where I stood. I waited for whoever it was to walk past or take a stall, but they didn't. The humming stopped mid-note, just like someone had been interrupted. I turned and called out, "Evening." But there was no answer. No movement, not even the sound of breathing. I checked under the stalls, nothing but shadows. I told myself maybe the sound had come from outside. Maybe the wind had carried it through the vent, but something about the silence that followed didn't sit right. I decided I'd just finish up and go. When I stepped out, the night felt thicker somehow, like the air itself was holding still. My truck door was hanging open. I know I'd locked it because I always did. The engine wasn't running, but my keys weren't in my pocket anymore. They were in the ignition. On the seat sat my camera bag, unzipped. I kept that thing close. It had every photo I'd taken on that trip, including the ones from the meetings and the old motels I'd stayed in. When I checked the camera, the memory card was empty. Every single picture, gone. I thought maybe someone had messed with me, but there were no footprints in the dust except mine. The semi at the far end of the lot was gone too. I didn't even notice it leave. I got in, started the truck, and just drove. Didn't even check the mirrors. For miles it felt like the headlights weren't reaching as far as they should, like the darkness was pushing back against them. After about an hour, I turned on the radio just for the comfort of a voice, but it was all static until I heard that same soft humming buried under the noise. It wasn't coming from any station, just right there in the middle of the static, slow and off-key, like someone trying to remember the rest of the song. I changed stations, turned the dial all the way, but it stayed. That was 15 years ago, and I've never driven that road again. I still have that camera, though. I keep it in a drawer in the house, and every so often I'll pull it out, thinking maybe I'll take it out again, start shooting like I used to. But when I hold it, it feels heavier than it should, like it's carrying something I left behind that night. Sometimes, on quiet evenings like this one, when the porch light hums and the wind moves through the mesquite, I'll catch myself humming Tennessee Waltz without realizing it. And every time I stop, the air feels just a little too still, like something is waiting to hear me finish the tune. My name is Roy Haskins, and I'm from Uvalde, Texas. I've lived here most of my life, except for a few years working over near Kerrville. Folks who've been around long enough probably remember that fire out toward the Black Hill turnoff, the one that took that old ranch house by the dry creek. It was near the end of summer, back when the grass burned just from looking at it too long. I can still smell that cedar smoke sometimes when the wind's right. That night comes back to me clearer than it ought to, like it's been sitting close behind my shoulder all these years, waiting for me to turn around. It started quiet, just me driving home from the feed store, the radio humming low under the static and thunder pushing somewhere out west. My old truck was coughing like it always did on hot evenings, and I remember tapping the dash, hoping the gas gauge was lying. The sky had that dull copper color before rain, and I could smell dirt lifting off the road, that clean, heavy smell you only get right before a storm breaks. I saw the glow before I saw the house, orange and soft at first like someone burning trash. Then it grew. The closer I got, the more it danced against the hills, throwing shadows across the mesquite and fence posts. I slowed the truck and rolled down my window, and the air hit me, thick, bitter, full of cedar and something else, something sweet and wrong. That's when I saw it proper. The house was near gone, roof already fallen in, and the heat was still pushing waves through the air. I pulled over by the gate and left the engine running. There was a sound, wood popping, wind humming through the wires, and underneath it, something like a low hum, steady as breathing. It didn't sound mechanical, not from a generator or truck, just alive somehow. I got out and stood by the fence. The cicadas had gone quiet. The only light came from that fire, and behind it the hills looked darker than they ever had. The next morning I went back out there with the county man just to see if anything needed reporting. The fire had run itself out in the night. All that was left was the stone foundation, and what looked like melted glass pooled near the steps. You could still feel the heat rising off it, like the ground hadn't finished breathing yet. There was a smell of wet ash and something like old iron. The county man said the place had been empty near 10 years, belonged to some ranch family that moved off after a bad season. I remember squatting by that melted glass, touching it with my glove and swearing I could feel a pulse in it, faint but steady. The man didn't stay long. He took a few pictures, told me they'd close the file once the report came in, but I lingered. I kept looking at where the front porch used to be. I could see the outline, the steps half buried in blackened dirt. That's when I noticed a set of old keys laying on the rail, clean as if someone had just set them there. The metal wasn't burned or warped. It looked new. The wind picked up and they rattled just once like a whisper, then went still again. I thought about taking them, but something in me said no, so I left them there. A few weeks later, I drove past again after work one evening. The place looked quieter than before. The grass had started to grow back through the ash, and a couple fence posts were leaning in like they were tired. But what got me was the light. There was a faint glow coming from where the porch used to be. Not bright, just a soft yellow, like a lantern left for company. I stopped the truck and sat there with the window down, listening. The night was full of sound again. Crickets, a coyote way off, the hum of wires. But that strange feeling came back, that heavy quiet inside the noise. I told myself it might be a reflection from town or maybe heat from the rocks. But deep down I knew it wasn't. I could smell cedar again, and that sweet wrongness underneath it. Sometimes, when storms roll in from the west, I'll drive out there. The road's rough now, half washed out, and the mesquite's taken back most of the field. I'll park by the gate and sit with the engine off, just listening. I always bring a thermos of coffee and an old blanket. The wind hums through the barbed wire, and every now and then I hear something shift out there like footsteps in wet dirt. Folks say the land forgets after a while. That fire clears what came before. But that place hasn't forgotten. Not once. I've seen the light on the porch more than once, always the same color. steady and small like someone waiting. I don't tell many people that. They'd say it's headlights from the highway or some trick of heat. But I know what I saw. I know how the air feels out there, how it thickens, how your skin starts to prickle like the world's holding its breath. Last spring, after a hard rain, I stopped again. The road was muddy and the creek bed was full for the first time in years. The hills smelled clean, washed of dust. I walked up to the spot where the house stood. The ground was soft and black, and I could see where the steps used to be under the weeds. I bent down, brushed away some dirt, and there they were, the keys. Still sitting on that same bit of wood, dry as bone, no rust, no mark from all those years. The air went still and I felt something close behind me, not touching, just there. I turned slow, but there wasn't a soul in sight, just the wind moving through the grass. I left again without taking them. Couldn't bring myself to. On the way back, the radio cut out right before town. Just static and a low hum that sounded mighty close to what I'd heard that first night. I don't go out there much anymore. My hands ache too bad to drive that far on dirt roads, and my eyes don't take the dark like they used to. But every now and then, when the porch light here at home starts to buzz and flicker, I'll catch myself staring toward the hills, listening for that hum. My wife says it's just the wind or the power lines, and she's probably right. Still, some nights I can't sleep, and I'll sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, smell the rain coming in, and think about that burned-out house. How the fire should have taken everything but didn't. How something stayed. I can still see the light sitting quiet on that porch rail. Steady and patient, same as it was that night the world turned copper and the cicadas went silent. And no matter how many times I've washed my hands since, there's always a bit of soot left under the nails, like the land won't quite let go. My name is Dean Larkin, and I'm from Marathon, Texas. I've been hauling freight up and down this state since I was 21, and I guess I've seen more of it at night than most folks ever will in the daylight. You spend enough time alone behind a wheel, you start to notice the small things. The way a gas pump clicks different when the temperature drops, or how the sound of cicadas fades when a storm's coming. I used to like that quiet, the kind that sits in your bones. But there's one stretch of road out near the bridge west of town that I can't drive anymore, not even in daylight. I didn't think much of it at first. It was late, close to midnight, and I was hauling empty pallets back toward Alpine. The road was dry, the air heavy with that sweet iron smell you get after rain's fallen on dust. My radio was picking up some AM preacher talking about redemption, the kind of voice that drifts in and out with the signal so you only catch every few words. I had a thermos of coffee on the seat beside me, and the hum of the tires on the pavement was steady enough to make me forget how tired I was. When I came up on the bridge, I noticed the wind. It had that low, hollow sound like it was pushing through a pipe. The riverbed under there had been dry for years, just rock and rust-colored sand. But that night, the air coming off it felt colder than it should have been. My headlights hit the guardrails, and for a second I thought I saw someone standing down there under the bridge, not moving, just standing facing the other direction. I figured maybe it was a ranch hand or somebody broken down, but there wasn't a car anywhere near. I slowed a little, leaned forward on the wheel, but the beam didn't catch a face, only the shape of a man. Thin, shoulders drawn up like he was cold. I almost pulled over, but something in me said not to. I told myself I'd call it in when I hit town, but I didn't. You ever get that feeling you've stepped too close to something that wasn't meant for you? That's what it felt like. The kind of wrong you can't explain, but you know to leave alone. The rest of the drive was quiet, but I couldn't shake it. I kept checking my mirrors, even though I knew better. When I topped the next hill, I saw movement in my rear view. A flicker of light that looked like headlights on that same bridge. Only thing was, there wasn't another vehicle for miles. I watched it until it faded, thinking maybe it was just a reflection, but the longer I looked, the more I realized it wasn't light. It was that same shape. Like he'd stepped out of the riverbed and was standing in the middle of the road behind me. Small in the distance, but clear as anything. I gripped the wheel so tight my hands cramped. I told myself it was the glare, that maybe I'd been awake too long. But when I blinked, he was closer. Not walking, not moving in any way I could see, just less far off than before. I felt the back of my neck go cold. My radio went to static. And that preacher's voice came through again for half a second, saying something about how the road home isn't always the one you expect. I turned the dial and it cut off. I didn't look back again. I drove all the way into Marathon without stopping, parked by the old Phillips station and sat there with the engine idling, watching the rearview mirror until the sun came up. Nothing followed me into town, but I swear the smell of rust stayed in that truck for weeks after. I quit long-haul runs not long after that. Told myself I was tired of the road. But the truth is, I just couldn't bring myself to cross that bridge again. They tore it down a few years back, built a new one higher up. But sometimes when the wind's right, you can still hear it moan across the dry riverbed like the old beams are still there. Every now and then I'll dream I'm driving again. The night's empty, the radio's soft, and I see the reflection of my own taillights bouncing off metal in the dark. I always wake up before I cross. Folks around here say there's nothing out there anymore, just sand and wind and the bones of a bridge that never held water. But I know what I saw that night. Or maybe I don't. Maybe it was something you're not supposed to understand, something that waits in the quiet until you're too tired to look away. Either way, I don't drive after dark anymore. Sometimes I sit out back with a cup of coffee, listening to the wind run through the mesquite. And I think about that stretch of highway, about how empty it felt, and how it still feels like something's standing there watching the road, waiting for someone who won't come back. My name is Caitlin Reese, and I'm from Lorena, Texas. It's a quiet little place off the highway, not much more than a few gas stations, a diner that closes too early, and the kind of evenings where the crickets and the trains seem to keep each other company. I used to drive through there a lot when I was working as a traveling nurse, moving between Waco and Temple. Long nights, long stretches of empty road. You start to learn the shape of the dark out there, the way the land flattens, the way the stars feel close enough to hear. That was about 6 years ago, maybe 7 now. I'd just finished a double shift at a rehab clinic outside Waco, and I was too tired to make it home. So I pulled off I-35 and found this old motel that sat just past the frontage road, half hidden behind a rusted sign that used to say Sunset Inn. But the letters were missing. The S and the T had fallen, so it just read Suna Inn. The place looked tired, but the office light was on and there was a vending machine humming by the door, so I figured it would do. The man at the desk looked like he'd been there forever. Kind eyes but quiet. He handed me a key with a faded orange tag that said Room 7 and told me the ice machine didn't work anymore. The hall smelled faintly of cigarettes and rain. I remember how the floor creaked under my boots and how my voice sounded too loud when I thanked him. The room itself wasn't much. Just a bed with a floral spread, an old box TV, a chair by the window, and one of those wall units that groaned when you turned on the air. I didn't even bother to unpack. I set my thermos of coffee on the table, took off my shoes, and sat for a while listening to the hum of the neon outside. The light from the sign flickered through the curtains, pink and red and gone again, over and over like breathing. I was still wearing my scrubs, and I remember rubbing at a spot of iodine on my sleeve when the sound started. Just a low crackle, like static. I looked over and the TV had turned itself on. No picture, just snow. The remote was still sitting untouched on the table. I figured maybe the wiring was old or the power flickered with the storm that was rolling in. I turned it off, poured a little coffee, and sat back. A few minutes later it came on again, louder this time, the static filling the room like rain on a tin roof. I got up, pressed the power button on the set itself, and the screen went black. But before it did, I swear I heard something under the static, just a breath of a voice. By name, I told myself it was nothing. Long shifts, not enough sleep. I'd had nights like that before, when the edges between things blurred a bit. I pulled the curtains closed, locked the door, and tried to lie down. The sheets were cool and smelled faintly of bleach. Outside, thunder rumbled off somewhere near the fields, and the sign buzzed and hummed, steady as a heartbeat. I must have dozed for a few minutes, because when I opened my eyes again, the room was dark except for the faint blue light of the TV. It had come on a third time. But this time there wasn't static. There was a voice, a woman's voice, soft and careful, speaking like she was leaving a message. At first I thought it was an old commercial, one of those late-night infomercials where someone talks too close to the microphone. But then I recognized the sound of my own name again. "Hey, Caitlin." "It's me." That's what she said, my voice. The same tone I used when I called home on my breaks. The sound of my own voice playing from that old TV, slow and deliberate like a voicemail being replayed. I stood up, every hair on my arm standing with me, and stepped closer. The image was still just a flat gray haze, no picture, but the sound was clear. "You shouldn't stay there," it said. "Please don't stay there tonight." I reached for the knob to turn it off, and the voice broke like a tape warping. Then it started over again. The same message looping, only softer, like someone whispering through cloth. I unplugged the set from the wall, yanked the cord so hard the plug bent, but even then the sound kept going for a moment longer, fading like it was being pulled down a well. When it finally stopped, I sat on the edge of the bed with my heart in my throat. The rain had started outside, light at first, tapping the window. I could hear the hum of the porch light outside my door, the buzz of electricity mixing with the smell of wet dirt and asphalt. I told myself I'd imagined it. Maybe it was an old message from another guest, something caught in the wiring. But deep down, I knew what my own voice sounded like, and I knew I'd never left that message. I didn't sleep after that. I kept the lights on and waited for the sky to start graying. Around 5, when the storm passed, I packed my bag and left the key on the counter. The man from the night before wasn't there. Just a note that said ring bell for service, but I didn't. I stepped out into the wet morning air, the smell of mesquite and rain heavy in my chest, and I looked back once. The sign was still flickering, but weaker now, and through the thin motel curtains I could see the faint blue light of a television playing in room 7. I hadn't turned it on. I stood there for a long time, listening to the hum of the highway waking up, the distant call of a train, and something else beneath it. A soft, steady rhythm, almost like someone quietly saying my name. I got in my truck and drove north, windows cracked to the smell of the wet fields, the radio fading in and out. I've passed that stretch of road a few times since, but I never saw the motel again. There's a new gas station there now, bright and clean, with no sign of the old drive or the row of rooms. Sometimes I wonder if I even found the right exit that night. But when the air turns heavy and the cicadas start to sing, I still think about it. The sound of my own voice coming through that static, warning me not to stay. I don't tell many people about it. It sounds foolish, I know, but every now and then when the TV in my living room flickers for no reason, I feel that same hush fall over the house, like something's listening for me. I keep a thermos of coffee by the door these days just in case I ever need to leave in a hurry. And sometimes when the wind's just right, I swear I can still hear the faint hum of that old neon sign, calling out in the dark, same as it always did. My name is Raymond Pike, and I'm from Shallowater, Texas. I used to drive a lot back then, mostly west of Lubbock, out where the land goes flat as a table and the sky just keeps on going. I was a salesman for farm equipment. Nothing fancy, just diesel tanks, water pumps, that kind of thing. I remember that evening because of the wind. It had that red grit in it, the kind that sticks to your teeth and makes the horizon look soft and far away. I was coming back from Leveland, late enough that the AM radio had turned to static between the preacher stations and country songs. My truck engine was fighting me, coughing a little when I hit the gas, and I kept one hand on the wheel, the other around a dented thermos of coffee that had gone cold hours earlier. There was a gas station about 20 miles outside Lubbock. Out by Highway 84, you wouldn't find it now. I checked years later, but back then it sat alone. A single row of pumps under a buzzing fluorescent canopy that hummed louder than the crickets. The sign said Phillip service, but half the letters were gone. I pulled in mostly because the wind was getting worse and my wipers could barely keep the dust off the glass. I remember the way the light hit that dust, turning it white like smoke. Inside, the place smelled like motor oil and old coffee. The floor had this sticky feel, like someone had mopped it but never rinsed it right. A man stood behind the counter, tall, maybe my age now, wearing one of those blue work shirts with a name patch stitched on. Only the name had faded too much to read. He looked up when I came in, and I nodded at him the way you do in small towns. He didn't smile, but he wasn't rude either. I said, "Evenin', rough weather out there," and he said, "Evenin', rough weather out there," right back at me, same tone, same timing. I figured I'd misheard him. The hum from the lights, the wind shaking the glass. So I tried again, said, "You got any diesel pumps still working? The one outside looks taped off." And he said, "You got any diesel pumps still working? The one outside looks taped off." His mouth moved with mine, just half a second behind, like he was watching my lips to get it right. I stopped talking then. He just looked at me, still as a post, the hum from those lights filling the quiet between us. I remember hearing the screen door creak from behind me, even though I hadn't seen anyone else outside. When I turned, there wasn't a soul in sight. Just the dark parking lot and my truck sitting under that light, dust swirling around like something alive. When I looked back at the man, he was holding out a paper receipt like I'd already paid. I hadn't even told him how much gas I wanted. My name was written on it, neat as could be. Raymond Pike. In handwriting I didn't recognize, but it looked practiced, like whoever wrote it had done it 1,000 times. I asked him where he got that, and he said, "Where you got that?" Still looking straight at me. I didn't know what to say. The air in there felt heavy, like when a storm's coming and you can smell the dirt rising. I reached for the paper, but when my fingers touched it, the lights flickered once, sharp and quick, and the man wasn't standing there anymore. The counter was empty, the register shut. I could still hear the hum, but it was softer now, like it was coming from far away. I looked down, and the receipt was already folded in my hand. I walked out slow, pushing the door open and stepping back into that red wind. My truck engine started on the first try, which surprised me. When I looked back toward the gas station, I could see the lights still on, but the windows were dark, like the place was empty. I drove a few miles before I looked at the paper again, and I swear to you, my hand was shaking like I'd been out in the cold. The receipt said I'd bought $42 of diesel and a coffee. I hadn't filled the tank, and I sure didn't buy any coffee. The timestamp read 11:17 p.m. That number stuck with me. For years after, I'd wake up around that same time, no reason at all. Just open my eyes and look at the clock, and it'd be 11:17. I still keep the receipt in my wallet. Same one I had that night. The paper's gone soft around the edges, but the ink never faded. I showed it to a friend once, back when I still thought maybe there was a reasonable explanation. But he just stared at it and said it didn't make sense. The gas station had shut down years before that night. Burned in a lightning storm, they said. No one ever rebuilt it. I went looking once just to see, and there was nothing left. No sign, no pumps, not even a patch of concrete. Just open land and that same steady wind pushing across it. Sometimes when I drive that stretch again, usually late when the sky's big and the road's empty, I catch myself slowing down around where I think the turn used to be. And every now and then I see a faint light way out there, flickering through the dust like a porch bulb that won't quite die. I tell myself it's a reflection, maybe from a far-off farmhouse or a truck passing on the other side. But deep down I know that place is still out there in some way, waiting maybe. I don't tell this story much. Folks either laugh or get quiet and change the subject. But I'll say this. When the wind starts to rise and the dust turns the air that pale red, I can almost smell that old gas station again. The burnt coffee, the oil, the hum of the lights. I can see the man behind the counter, watching me like he's waiting for me to say something first. And every time I think of that folded receipt in my wallet, and I wonder who wrote my name before I ever walked through that door. My name is Hannah Bell, and I'm from Clifton, Texas. I used to go camping by myself a lot when I was younger, mostly around the lakes and rivers near home. It wasn't about getting away from people so much as it was about being quiet for a while, you know. I had a little green tent that smelled like pine sap and rain, and an old cooler with a dent in the lid from where my brother dropped it out of the truck years ago. Back then I worked long shifts at the feed store, and by Friday night my head would be full of noise, so I'd drive out to Lake Whitney, find a spot under the mesquites, and let the world calm itself down. That particular weekend I remember clearly because it was early September. The kind of evening when the air hangs still and you can almost taste the dirt after a dry spell. The cicadas were thick and loud at first, then they tapered off after sunset, leaving that long stretch of quiet hum that only comes when everything's waiting for rain. I parked close to the water, near one of those old concrete picnic tables they built back in the 60s, the ones that always stay a little damp underneath. I set up my tent a few yards back from it, made some coffee in the little percolator I kept in my truck, and sat watching the last boats drift across the lake as the light went gray. I remember the way the air smelled, a mix of algae, mud, and something faintly sweet, like honeysuckle that had given up blooming weeks ago. I wasn't scared or anything. I'd been there plenty of times. Sometimes the park rangers would swing by, sometimes not. I liked that feeling of being almost alone, but not quite, like someone might drive by if you needed them. But otherwise the night was yours. Around 9, I switched off the lantern and let the moon handle it. The surface of the lake was calm enough to catch the reflection of a single blinking light from across the water, probably from someone's dock or maybe a fisherman's lantern. I could hear the steady lap of water against the bank, a slow, patient sound. I fell asleep to that, thinking it was the kind of night you could rest in forever. When I woke up, it was still dark. My watch said 3:27. I could hear something, not loud but close, like someone shifting their weight on dry grass. I sat up and listened. The air had gone cooler, and the wind had picked up just enough to move the sides of the tent. I told myself it was probably a raccoon nosing around the cooler, so I laid back down, tried to breathe easy. But after a minute, I heard it again, that faint crunch of steps, slow and careful, circling the tent. Not heavy like boots, softer, uneven. I held my breath, and it stopped right by where my head was. Then nothing. No footsteps walking away, no zipper tugged, no sound at all. Just the wind. I must have stayed awake another hour before I drifted off again. In the morning, the world looked perfectly ordinary. Pale blue sky, some clouds rolling in from the west, that smell of coffee and lake water mixing in the air. But when I went to open the cooler, I noticed something in the dirt beside it. A footprint. Bare. Small. Maybe the size of my own foot, but pressed deep. Like whoever made it was standing still for a long time. The odd thing was, the ground wasn't soft enough to take a print like that unless there'd been rain, and it hadn't rained in weeks. The dirt was dry and crusted over, cracked like old paint. I looked around thinking maybe it was left from before, but there were more. Just one print over and over, spaced out unevenly, circling the cooler, then heading toward the picnic table. Always the same foot. No left, no right. Just the same print, repeating like someone stepping forward and then backward in the same motion. I walked down to the edge of the lake, thinking maybe a kid had wandered through, but there weren't any campers close by. The next side over was empty, just an old fire ring filled with gray ash. I followed the prints until they faded into the dry weeds near the table, and that's where I noticed something else. A faint damp patch on the concrete bench, shaped kind of like a hand pressed down flat. I touched it. Cool. The air smelled sharper then, like metal, and for a moment I thought I heard ripples again, though the water was still as glass. I stood there a long time, listening. The wind had gone quiet. Even the insects seemed to be holding their breath. I don't know how long I stood before I finally packed up. I told myself it was just something I couldn't explain yet. Maybe a trick of the light or the moisture. But deep down, I felt something had been waiting there long before I came. The drive back to Clifton felt longer than usual. I kept the radio on low, AM static flickering in and out between old songs, and every time the signal faded, I caught myself glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone sitting at that picnic table, watching the road. I tried not to think about it after that, though sometimes when the wind moves just right through the trees at night, I catch that same cool smell. Algae, rain, something old. I stopped camping alone not long after, told folks it was because of work or because I got tired of the bugs, but that wasn't true. It's because of that quiet moment by the lake when everything should have been still, but wasn't. Years later, I went back once, just to see if the place felt the same. They'd built new picnic tables, poured fresh gravel near the campsites, but I found the old concrete one down by the waterline, half covered in moss. It looked smaller somehow. The lake had pulled back, leaving the ground dry and cracked around it. I stood there with my thermos, listening to the soft hum of the wind and thinking maybe whatever I'd felt that night was just loneliness wearing another face. But then I noticed the surface of the lake again, flat, calm, except for one small ripple moving outward in a perfect circle, as if something had just risen and gone still again. I watched it until it disappeared, then turned and walked back to the truck. The engine struggled a little before it caught, that familiar coughing sound before the rumble settled steady. As I pulled away, I saw the table one last time in the mirror, half in shade, half in sun, and for just a second I thought there was someone sitting there, not moving, just watching the water. I never went back after that. But sometimes when the nights are real quiet and the air feels heavy, I'll wake up certain I can hear that same slow ripple against the shore. It comes once, then fades, and I lie there with my eyes open, waiting for the next sound. It never comes, just the stillness, just the kind of silence that feels like it's listening. My name is Don Reeves, and I'm from Tyler, Texas. I don't talk much about that night, not because I'm scared of it anymore, but because when I do, People look at me like I've forgotten what's real and what isn't. Maybe I have, I don't know. I was 58 that spring and I'd just driven out to the old family land after years of leaving it alone. My daddy's place, what was left of it, sat about 15 miles east of Tyler down a dirt road that hadn't seen a grader in decades. It had rained the whole drive up. A steady, soaking kind of rain that made the air smell like pine and wet dust. The windshield wipers in my old Ford groaned every few seconds and the radio faded in and out, catching bits of a preacher's voice and static before losing the signal altogether. I remember I had a thermos of coffee beside me, the lid a little loose and steam rising into the cab. It was early evening when I turned onto that road, frogs croaking somewhere out near the creek and the tires throwing up wet gravel against the fenders. The farmhouse came into view just before dark, gray boards swollen from years of weather, the porch sagging a little to one side. The fields around it had gone wild, knee-high grass, mesquite pushing up where there used to be corn. I killed the engine and just sat there for a minute, listening to the rain ticking against the roof, the way it used to sound when I was a kid trying to fall asleep in that same house. I don't know what made me come back, really. Maybe just wanting to see it once more before it fell completely apart. I'd been thinking about selling the land. My sister said there were folks who'd buy it for the timber. But standing there in the rain, it didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like something I was visiting, like a grave that belonged to someone else. I went up the steps and the porch light, old as the house itself, still had a faint hum when I flipped the switch. To my surprise, it came on, weak and yellow through the rain. I guess the power line hadn't been cut off after all. The screen door creaked when I opened it. Same sound I remembered from my childhood. Inside, the air was thick with dust and that sour smell of damp wood. I walked slow, shining my flashlight along the walls. The kitchen window had been boarded up years ago, but there were muddy streaks across the floor like someone had come through after the rain. At first, I thought maybe an animal had gotten in, but then I noticed something that made me stop. Footprints. Not paw prints, not scuffs. Bare human footprints, fresh. The kind that still hold their shape before the water dries. I knelt down and felt the floor. Cold. Wet. Whoever had been there, it hadn't been long. I remember standing up and telling myself it was nothing. Maybe kids or squatters. But there was no sign of forced entry. The front door was still locked when I came in. That's when the feeling hit me. The kind of stillness you notice before a storm, except the storm had already passed. I called out just a simple, "Hello?" like I was talking to the walls. My voice didn't sound right in there, too thin. I heard something then, a soft sound from down the hall like a drawer sliding shut. I told myself again it was just the house settling. But I couldn't shake the sense that someone was listening. I should have left right then, but instead I pulled out my phone. I don't know why. Maybe habit. Maybe I wanted proof, something to show my sister. I took a few photos. The kitchen, the footprints, the counter where Mama used to keep her coffee can full of change. The flash lit up the room in quick bursts, making the shadows jump. When I was done, I stepped outside to breathe. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. I remember the smell of wet pine and the sound of frogs louder than before. I sat on the porch rail, poured myself a bit of coffee, and just stared out toward the field. The night felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. I don't know how long I sat there. Maybe an hour. I finally decided to head into town and get a room for the night. As I started the truck, I glanced at the phone again, scrolling through the pictures. That's when I saw it. In one of the shots, the one of the kitchen, you could see more than the floor. Behind me, in the dark part of the doorway, there was a figure. Not clear, not close, but you could tell it was a person. The shoulders were turned toward me, and the head was just low enough like they were looking down. I remember the way my stomach dropped. I told myself it was a trick of the light. Reflection from the flash, something like that. But in the next photo, the same doorway looked empty. I stared at that screen for a long time, the hum of the engine the only sound. I ended up sleeping in the truck that night, parked behind the old gas station off Highway 31. The rain started again, tapping the roof, steady as breathing. I dreamed about the house, about the kitchen light flickering and footsteps in the hallway. When I woke up, the sky was pale gray and I felt older than I did the day before. I went back once more that morning, thinking I'd make sure the place was locked up and then leave for good. But when I got there, the footprints were gone. The floor was dry, the boards lighter where the water had been. The air felt warmer too, like the house had settled back into itself, quiet and harmless. I took one last look around and locked the door behind me. A few months later, I sold the property to a man from Houston. He said he planned to tear the old house down and build something new. I told him that was fine. He asked if there was anything he should know about the place, and I said no. I've learned some things are better left unsaid. Every so often, though, I'll dream about it again. The smell of wet pine, the hum of that porch light, the soft sound of rain on the roof. In those dreams, I'm standing in the kitchen looking down at the floor. The prints start to appear again, one after another, leading up behind me. I never turn around in the dream. I just stand there waiting, like maybe if I stay still long enough, I'll finally understand who or what I shared that house with that night. I haven't been back to Tyler much since then. When I drive that way, I take the long route around. But sometimes if the road is quiet and the air smells like rain, I'll think about stopping, just to see if that light is still on. Folks say the new house was built right where the old one stood. Though I heard from someone in town that the man from Houston never actually moved in, said he couldn't sleep there, always hearing things. Could be gossip. Could be truth. Either way, I keep my distance. But some nights, when I can't sleep, I'll step out onto my porch with a cup of coffee, listening to the wind moving through the trees, and I swear I can smell that same wet pine again, drifting up from the east. I tell myself it's nothing, just the night carrying old memories. But deep down, I think part of that place never really let go. It's still out there, waiting quiet in the rain, holding whatever it was that once stood behind me. My name is Lucinda Moore, and I'm from Fort Stockton, Texas. I used to tell folks I was from Midland or Odessa, or whichever place I happened to be working in at the time, but truth is, I was born out by Fort Stockton, and that's where most of my people still are. What's left of them anyway? I've been on the road most of my adult life, and it's funny how, after a while, every highway starts to look the same when you've been walking it long enough. Same barbed wire fences leaning into the wind. Same dry grass pressed flat by passing trucks. Same smell of old oil and dust that gets in your clothes and stays. This happened about 15 years ago, though some days it feels like last week. I was hitching west toward El Paso, carrying a green duffel bag I'd had since I was 19. The zipper stuck a little and one of the straps was half torn, but it had been with me through a lot and I couldn't bear to throw it out. I'd burned the clothes inside it a few years before, out behind a cheap motel in San Angelo, stuff from a time I didn't want to remember. I stood there watching that little fire die down to embers, thinking I was closing a door on something. Guess I was wrong about that. Anyway, that night I'd been dropped off somewhere between Pecos and Toya, out on the shoulder where the road cuts through the flatland, and you can see those red lights on the oil rigs blinking slow and steady against the sky. It was dead calm, not even a breath of wind, and the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I remember the sound of a truck engine fading out, then nothing but the creak of my boots and the hiss of the sand shifting across the asphalt. I had maybe half a thermos of coffee left and figured I'd walk until I saw a rest stop or a lit sign, but the road just kept going. The moon was full and white, hanging low enough to touch the tops of the telephone poles, and I could see my own shadow stretched long and thin beside me. After a while, I started thinking about home. My mama sitting on the porch with her radio tuned to that old AM station out of Abilene. My dad's truck parked half in the grass. The way the porch light used to hum when the moths hit it. Funny the things that come to mind when you're alone out there. I was lost in those thoughts when I saw something up ahead, just off the shoulder. A dark shape lying in the ditch. At first I thought it was some old tarp or maybe a deer somebody had hit, but as I got closer, the shape started to look familiar. The strap, the patch on the side, even the way it leaned slightly to one side. It was my duffel. I stopped dead right there in the road. My hand tightened on the thermos because that's all I had to hold on to. I looked behind me, empty highway. Looked ahead, nothing but a mile of straight blacktop shining under the moon. I don't know how long I stood there before I finally stepped off the asphalt and knelt beside it. It was dusty, but not torn or dirty like you'd expect something to be after sitting out in the desert. It looked like it had just been set down. The zipper was half open, and I could see a bit of flannel poking out. My stomach turned because I recognized that shirt. Red and gray plaid, missing the bottom button. I'd burned that shirt. I remember the smell of it in the fire, the way the fabric curled up and blackened. I reached out meaning to touch it, but my hand started shaking. There wasn't a sound anywhere, not even the rigs in the distance. The whole desert felt like it was waiting on me. Finally, I told myself maybe it was some trick of memory. That I'd had another duffel just like it, or maybe I'd never really burned the clothes, just thought I had. I wanted to believe that so bad. I pulled the zipper all the way down. Inside were the same clothes I'd burned: shirt, jeans, a little denim jacket that still smelled faintly of smoke. Folded just the way I used to pack them. On top there was something I didn't recognize. A Polaroid face down. I picked it up and turned it over. It was me, standing on that same stretch of road, same boots, same duffel at my feet. But the picture looked old, sun-faded, like it had been taken years ago. I don't remember dropping it. I don't remember anyone taking it. I just remember feeling like the air had gone heavy, like the world was tilting slow under me. I put the photo back in the bag and zipped it shut. The zipper moved smooth this time, no catching. I left it there and stepped back onto the road. I don't know what I thought would happen. Maybe I expected to wake up or see headlights coming, but the night just stayed still. I walked until the sun came up, and when I looked back, the shoulder was empty. No bag, no tire marks, nothing. I made it to a diner outside Pecos the next morning. The waitress poured my coffee and asked if I'd been walking long. I said, yeah, longer than I meant to. She smiled and said there wasn't much out there, and she was right. I didn't tell her what I'd seen. Didn't tell anybody. I caught a ride later that day and kept going west, but something in me stayed on that road. Sometimes when I'm out walking another highway, I'll catch myself glancing down at the shoulder, thinking I see that same duffel waiting there. I never look twice. I keep my eyes on the horizon and my hands in my pockets. Whatever was in that bag, it isn't mine anymore. I figure some things you leave where you find them. That night near Pecos, I learned not everything that burns stays gone, and I've been walking ever since. One road blending into the next, the sound of the rigs flashing slow behind me, and the desert watching quiet and patient, like it's still waiting for me to look down again. My name is Troy Lang, and I'm from New Boston, Texas. I don't talk much about that night anymore, though it's been near 30 years now. Some stories just sit with you, quiet as a shadow in the back of your mind, and you learn not to stir them up unless the air already feels heavy. I remember it was late summer, that kind of heat that stays long after the sun's gone. The porch boards were still warm under my boots when I stepped off. Thermos of coffee in one hand, tackle box in the other. The sky had that deep purple stillness before full dark, and I figured I'd drive down to the creek for a bit, maybe catch something before the rain came in. My old Ford took a couple tries to start, coughing and rattling like an old dog clearing its throat. The AM radio faded in and out, some preacher from Texarkana talking about sin and patience, but it kept me company till I hit the dirt road that led down toward Bowie County Creek. The windows were rolled down, and I could smell the rain coming, earthy, sharp, mixing with the dust that rose behind me. By the time I parked under those twisted mesquites, the crickets had started up, and the only light came from the glow of my dash and the hum of my little flashlight. I'd been fishing that same stretch since I was a kid, back when my dad was still around. He used to say the creek had its own kind of patience, that it never gave you what you wanted when you wanted it, but if you sat quiet long enough, it might share something with you. I thought about that as I baited the line, the water moving slow, thick from the heat. Mosquitoes were bad that night, landing on the back of my neck and buzzing in my ears, but I didn't mind much. There was something peaceful about it, the soft slap of the current, the low croak of frogs, the air heavy but still. After a while, I poured myself some coffee, sat back on the bank, and just listened to the world go on. Then I saw it, a white shape moving slow against the dark water coming from upstream. At first I thought it was just an old cooler someone had lost. Folks left junk in that creek all the time. But as it got closer, I saw the cracked blue handle and the red lid, and my heart gave a little jump. It looked exactly like mine. I mean exactly. Same faded sticker of the Rangers logo on the side, same scrape across the lid from where it fell out of my truck last spring. I laughed a little at the thought, told myself maybe someone found it and tossed it back in. Still, something about it made me stand up and step closer to the edge. The flashlight beam wobbled on the water and the thing drifted right to my boots, gentle as if it knew the way. I reached down, half expecting it to be full of mud or sticks, but when I lifted the lid, it wasn't empty. Inside was a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, a half-drunk bottle of Dr. Pepper, and an apple with a single bite taken out. Exactly what I'd packed that morning before leaving the house. I just stood there, the smell of wet earth around me, trying to figure if I'd somehow left it here days ago and forgotten. Though I knew I hadn't fished that creek in months, I remember the way the air felt then, heavier, like the sound had drained out of it. The frogs had gone quiet, even the crickets held still. I could hear the low hum of the porch light back home in my head, that lonely buzz you only notice when everything else has stopped. I set the cooler down and stepped back, my flashlight shaking a little. The water lapped at the bank, soft and slow, and I got that feeling like someone was standing just behind me. Not close enough to touch, but close enough to feel. I turned, but the woods were empty, just the dark shapes of trees, the wind moving through them in little sighs. I told myself it was just tiredness or the heat, or maybe that Dr. Pepper I'd had earlier working on my nerves. I tried to laugh it off, but my throat was dry. I packed up fast after that, not running exactly, but not wasting time either. When I threw the cooler into the bed of the truck, it made a hollow sound like it was empty, though I hadn't touched what was inside. The ride home felt longer than it should have, and the radio wouldn't catch a signal the whole way. Just static, like whispering behind glass. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the porch light was flickering, same as it always did when a storm was near. I remember standing there, hand on the cooler handle, wondering if I should even bring it inside. In the end, I left it on the porch and went in, washed my hands, tried to shake the chill off with another cup of coffee. But I couldn't stop thinking about that apple, that one bite, neat and small like mine. Next morning, the cooler was gone. Porch was empty, wet from the night's rain, but no tracks, no sign of it. I asked a few neighbors later, but nobody had been out that way. The creek had flooded some, they said, might have carried off all kinds of things. I wanted to believe that. For years I did, but sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet and I'm sitting out here with the wind moving soft through the trees, I swear I can still smell that creek water. It's a thick, earthy kind of smell, like rust and rain and something older underneath. Every now and then, when it rains hard enough, I'll taste it in the air, a faint metallic tang. Familiar in a way I wish it wasn't. Folks laugh when I tell them I don't fish much anymore, not since that night. I just say I've lost the patience for it, but that's not the truth. The truth is, some things out there are older than memory. And maybe they remember us better than we remember them. Sometimes, when thunder rolls far off and the porch light hums a little louder, I think about that cooler drifting toward me, slow and steady, carrying pieces of my day I thought were my own. I think about how still the world felt in that moment, how it seemed like the creek wasn't reflecting the moonlight, but holding it down there beneath the surface, waiting. I never told anyone else the whole story, not my brother, not my pastor, not the few friends I've got left. But every time I drive past that stretch of road, I glance toward the trees, and I can almost see the glint of water through the dark. Sometimes I think I hear a splash, like something surfacing. It's probably nothing. Still, I keep the windows rolled up now when I pass, and I don't stop. Not even when I'm thirsty. The air smells different out there, like it remembers me. And when the rain starts falling heavy on the windshield, I swear the water tastes like me, too. My name is Jill Morton, and I'm from Tulia, Texas. I was 29 when this happened, driving west toward Amarillo in late spring a few years back. I'd packed up what little I owned, some books, a coffee thermos, my old guitar, and a few clothes in the trunk of a silver Corolla that was starting to rattle if you went much over 60. The plan was to start over, teaching at a new school near Las Cruces, and I remember feeling half excited, half hollow, like I'd closed a chapter but hadn't yet found the next one. That stretch of highway north of Canyon gets long in a way that wears on you. All sky and flat earth and wind that never stops pushing against the car. It was early evening, maybe a little after 7 when I saw the sign for a rest area. I figured I'd pull in, stretch, use the restroom, refill my coffee from the thermos. The place was empty when I pulled up, just a single building with 2 faded picnic tables and a flagpole creaking in the wind. The air smelled like dirt and old rain, and the prairie grass around the parking lot swayed in long, tired waves. When I got out, the wind hit me hard enough to pull my hair loose from its tie, and I had to hold my jacket closed. The door to the women's restroom groaned when I opened it. That long, rusty sound metal gets when no one's used it much. Inside, the air was cooler, stale, with that faint hum from the fluorescent lights overhead. There were 4 stalls, all shut tight, and I noticed right away that every single one had the latch turned as if someone was inside. I thought that was odd since I hadn't seen another car anywhere, not even a truck on the road. Just that wide silence broken by wind and the far-off hum of highway. I waited a minute listening, expecting to hear movement or a cough or something, but there was nothing. Just the faint buzz of the lights and the sound of air moving through the vent. I knocked once, soft, said hello, but the sound just bounced back. I figured maybe someone had jammed them all for cleaning or repairs, though it didn't make much sense in a place that empty. I stepped closer to the first stall and tried the door, gentle, but it didn't budge. Same with the second, all four locked, each with that tiny metal latch turned tight from the inside. I felt this little drop in my stomach. Not fear exactly, just that quiet wrongness you get when something doesn't fit the shape it should. I set my coffee down by the sink and looked around. The mirror was cracked near the corner, the kind of long crack that looked like a vein spreading through the glass. The hum of the light above it flickered once, and I remember thinking maybe I should just leave. But it was a long drive still, and the wind outside was cold. So I tried the last stall again, pressing my palm flat against the door. I remember feeling that chill through the metal, the kind that seems to come from inside the object, not the air. Then, so faint I almost didn't notice, it clicked. That quiet, deliberate sound of a latch being turned. I froze, hand still on the door. The metal shifted just enough that I could see a sliver of darkness inside. I thought maybe someone had been in there all along, embarrassed or shy, but no footsteps followed. No rustle of clothes, nothing at all. I waited, heart thumping, then nudged the door open. It swung slow, scraping the tile, and inside it was empty. Nothing but a single paper towel crumpled in the corner and a faint wet mark on the floor near the drain, like someone had stood there not long before. I felt this pressure then behind my ribs, the kind that tells you you're not alone even when your eyes say you are. I backed out, checked the other stalls again, and one by one they were still locked. I left my coffee where it was and walked out into the wind. The sun was lower now, the sky gone pale orange at the edge, and I could see dust lifting off the plain like breath. I remember how quiet it felt then, like the world was holding still. I started the car and the engine coughed twice before catching. As I drove off, I looked in the rearview mirror, and the rest area was shrinking behind me, just a small gray shape against the endless tan of the land. But I swear I saw one of the restroom doors swing open before it disappeared from view. Just wide enough to catch the light like it was saying something. I told myself it was the wind. It had to be the wind. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had turned that latch had known I was there. When I stopped for the night in Amarillo at one of those old roadside motels with buzzing neon and gravel lots, I washed my hands in the sink and felt that same chill in the water, that same stillness. I've made that drive a few more times since, but I never stop there anymore. I keep going no matter how much coffee I've had or how bad I need to stretch. You'd laugh maybe hearing me say that, but I can't help it. Something about that place, about the way that latch turned on its own, it got under my skin. I still think about it when I'm driving alone and the road gets too quiet. Sometimes I catch myself watching the restroom doors at gas stations, waiting for one to move just a little when it shouldn't, and when it does, just a slow inch or two, I feel that same weight settle in me, that same old quiet. I tell myself it's just air pressure or the hinges or the draft, but deep down I know better. Some things out here don't need to make sense to be real. I still avoid doors that open slow. My name is Carter Wells, and I'm from a little place outside San Angelo, Texas. I was born there, raised there, and for a long time I figured I'd die there too. My daddy ran a small farm, nothing fancy, just enough to keep us fed and keep the lights on. Most mornings started before the sun did. Coffee from a dented thermos, boots by the door still dusty from the day before. The same old AM station crackling out weather reports and gospel music. There's something about that kind of quiet before the world wakes up that gets into a man. You start to think the land itself remembers things. I used to sit on the porch before heading out to the field, watch the light crawl up over the mesquite, and listen to the wind moving through the grass. Back then it felt like peace. Looking back, I guess it was, but it didn't stay that way. Not after that summer. It was August and dry as bone. The dirt cracked under your boots and the air had that heavy burnt smell it gets before a storm that never quite comes. We'd put in some new irrigation lines that spring. Metal pipes laid out along the lower field to help keep the corn alive. They ran in long rows, half buried, with a low hum when the pump kicked on. That sound used to calm me, steady, mechanical, like the heartbeat of the farm itself. One night I was out there checking a valve that kept sticking. The sky was a flat gray. No moon, just heat lightning flickering way out west. I remember the grass brushing against my jeans, the smell of diesel, the crunch of gravel under my boots. I'd been alone out there plenty of times, but that night felt different before anything even happened. The air felt thick, like it was holding its breath. I told myself it was just the storm teasing again. I crouched down beside the pipe and laid my hand on it to check for pressure, and I heard it. Just a faint sound at first, a kind of whisper that I thought was the wind passing through the openings. But the wind had stopped. It was dead still. Then I heard it again, clearer this time, and I swear to you it was my name, soft, drawn out, like someone standing just a few feet off calling me through the metal. Carter. It wasn't loud, not a shout, but it carried. I stood up, looked around, shined my flashlight across the field, saw nothing but rows of dry stalks and the glint of the irrigation pipes running off into the dark. The only sound was the hum from the pump, steady and low. I called out, asked if it was my brother maybe or one of the hands, but no answer came back. Just that hum, and then again, quieter. Carter. Now you tell yourself all sorts of things when something doesn't make sense. The mind doesn't like empty places, so it fills them. I told myself the sound was the water pushing air through, that the pipe was carrying some kind of vibration from the pump house. But it didn't feel like that. It felt intentional, like something waiting on the other end. I turned off the flashlight to listen better, and I realized the hum had changed. It wasn't steady anymore. It rose and fell, slow and uneven, like breathing. And when I say that, I mean it followed the rhythm of mine. I stood there, and every time I drew in air, that pipe seemed to hum a little louder. And when I exhaled, it softened. I tested it, held my breath, and the hum flattened out, just a dull metal tone. I started breathing again, and it followed. It matched me. I can't say how long I stood there. Time gets strange in moments like that. I remember the sweat running down my neck, the flashlight still off, and that feeling that something was awake under the ground, something that had been there longer than us, longer than the farm itself. I backed away slow, not wanting to turn my back on it. And when I did finally reach the truck, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine fought me, coughed, sputtered, and in that dead space before it caught, I swear I heard a voice through the open window, close as a whisper against my ear, saying, "Don't leave." The engine roared to life right then, loud enough to drown out anything else. And I drove straight home with the windows up and the radio turned all the way down. I didn't go back to that field for a few days. My daddy sent one of the other hands to check the pipes, said everything was working fine, no leaks, no damage, no reason for that hum to act up. But after that night, I started hearing it other places. In the well when I'd draw water. In the wind through the slats of the barn. That same rhythm, slow and patient, waiting. I tried to tell myself I was just tired, but the more I tried to ignore it, the louder it seemed to get. I'd wake up at night and think I heard water running under the house like the pipes were alive, whispering. I stopped using the irrigation after a while, let the crops go dry, couldn't stand that sound anymore. Folks around town thought I'd lost it, said I was letting the place rot. Maybe I was. A few months later, I packed up and left. Couldn't take the quiet anymore. You'd think leaving would help, but it didn't. Every time I hear water running through pipes at a rest stop sink, a motel shower, it's like I can hear it again, faint and steady, waiting for me to listen close enough. I never told anyone the full story before now. It's been years and I don't expect anyone to believe it, but I can still see that field in my mind, the rows stretching out into the dark, the smell of rain that never came, and that low hum breathing with me in the dirt. I don't go near running water anymore. I drink from bottles, wash quick, keep the faucet low. People laugh when I tell them I hate the sound of a pipe. But when the night's quiet and the wind dies down, I can still feel it under the floor, steady, patient, waiting. And I wonder sometimes if maybe it was never the pipes making that sound at all. Maybe it was something deeper, something that just found a way to breathe through them for a while. Either way, I left that farm behind. But it hasn't left me. My name is Beth Sloan, and I'm from Fort Davis, Texas. I used to drive the mail route between there and Alpine 5 days a week for near 15 years. It was steady work, quiet mostly, just me, the road, and the sun climbing up over those low mountains each morning. Folks around there know that stretch of 118. It's long and flat in places, with just enough dips to make you think you've seen movement when you haven't. I liked it though. I'd pack my thermos with coffee, put on that old AM station that never came in quite clear, and watch the desert wake up. There's something about those mornings. The way the light hits the sand and the creosote, and the way the wind moves slow, like it's thinking about something. I always felt safe out there. Alone, sure, but safe. This one day I remember it was hotter than usual even for late spring. The air shimmered right above the asphalt, and the truck felt like an oven before the air kicked in. I'd just passed the old Shell station that closed down years ago, the one with the faded mural of the jackrabbit on the side, when I noticed the tire tracks. I know that sounds strange, there are always tracks out there, but these were fresh, like someone had just driven through, and the odd thing was, they matched mine exactly. Same tread pattern, same width. I slowed down a bit, thinking maybe I'd somehow looped back around, though I knew I hadn't. The road doesn't work like that. But I could see them plain as day, running right ahead of me. Like another truck had gone before me only minutes ago, maybe even seconds. I leaned forward over the wheel, squinting through the glare, but there wasn't any dust in the air, no sign of another vehicle. Just the road and those twin black trails stretching on into the heat. I told myself it must have been someone earlier that morning. Maybe another delivery or a rancher with the same kind of tires. But the longer I followed them, the more it got under my skin. They hugged every turn I took, every dip, every little swerve I made out of habit. Like they knew where I was going before I did. Around mile marker 42, I stopped the truck. I sat there a while. Engine running, heat pressing against the windshield, cicadas whining in the brush. I looked out across the desert, trying to find where those tracks began, but the light was so bright it made everything look like it was melting. When I climbed out, the air hit me like a furnace, dry and empty, and I could hear that faint buzz of the power lines that run along the highway. The tracks were there, right at my front tires, deep and recent, heading forward into the shimmer. I crouched down and touched the dirt. It was loose, hot, still shifting from the breeze, but those impressions were sharp. They weren't old. I remember standing up and looking back toward Fort Davis, half expecting to see my own tracks behind me. But the sand had covered most of them. Ahead, though, those prints ran straight on, disappearing into the glare. I don't know what made me start driving again, but I did. Maybe it was just routine, or maybe it felt worse to stand still. The road stretched quiet for miles, not another soul in sight. I kept thinking I'd catch up to whoever it was, that maybe there'd be a turnoff or a ranch road, but nothing. The desert was still, like it was holding its breath. Then somewhere past the old windmill where the radio always cuts out, I saw where the tracks turned. They veered off to the right, slow and wide, into a patch of sand and scrub. I pulled over and sat there, staring at that curve. There wasn't a fence, no gate, no trail, just open land. The tracks ended about 20 feet off the road, just ended. No sign of a truck, no footprints, no dust. Like whoever it was had driven straight into the air. I felt this heaviness come over me, not fear exactly, but a kind of knowing I didn't want. The wind had picked up by then, carrying the smell of rain even though the sky was empty, and I could hear the screen on the vent rattling faintly. I got out and walked toward the end of those tracks, slow, careful. Each step felt like walking through something thicker than air. When I reached the spot, I realized the prints didn't stop so much as they sank. The last few inches of tread looked pressed down hard, like the weight had gone straight into the ground instead of over it. I remember crouching there, touching the sand again. It was cool in the middle, cooler than it should have been. My throat went dry and I stood up fast, dust sticking to my palms. I backed away, watching that spot, waiting for something. What? I don't know. Maybe I expected the truck to appear again. Maybe my own. But nothing moved. The wind quieted down and the world just went still, like the desert was listening. I drove to Alpine that afternoon, finished my route, dropped off the mail like always. Didn't say a word to anyone. But on the way back, just before dusk, I looked down at the road and saw them again. Fresh tracks, same pattern, same distance apart, running ahead of me in the fading light. I followed them all the way back to town. They turned into my driveway before I did. I sat there for a long time, engine idling, watching my own dust settle. When I finally pulled in, the tracks in the dirt matched mine exactly, down to the tread mark on the rear left tire where a rock had chipped it years ago. I tried not to think about it too much after that, though some nights I still do. I quit the route a year later. Folks said it was the heat getting to me, and maybe it was. But sometimes on clear nights when the wind carries the smell of rain, I'll wake up thinking I hear my truck out on that road again. Tires rolling slow over gravel, following something I can't see. And when I close my eyes, I'm right back there on that desert stretch. The horizon trembling in the sun, those same two tracks winding ahead of me, curving off into nothing, like they've been waiting all this time for me to follow. My name is Kenny Dobb, and I'm from Van Horn, Texas. I guess I ought to start by saying this happened a long time ago, back when I was 30, playing music on the road with a few friends. We weren't famous or anything, just working small bars between El Paso and Midland, trying to make enough for gas and a room that didn't smell too bad. That night, the others had turned in at a little roadside motel outside Sierra Blanca, but I couldn't sleep. I'd been restless all day, feeling that kind of homesick that hits you when you realize you've been gone too long and the road's starting to look the same no matter which way you go. I remember stepping out into the parking lot, the desert air cooling down after the sun had baked it all day. The porch light outside the motel office buzzed, and there was a smell of dust and diesel and far-off rain. My old Ford was parked under the flickering sign, and the radio was still tuned to some AM station playing slow country songs half buried in static. I figured I'd drive a bit, clear my head, maybe find a late-night gas station with coffee that didn't taste like rust. It was close to midnight when I pulled off onto a small station just east of town. You've probably seen one like it. 2 pumps out front, one of those faded Coca-Cola signs leaning sideways, the office light glowing weak and yellow through dusty glass. The wind had picked up and the pump lights buzzed like tired bees. I remember stepping out, the crunch of gravel under my boots, the faint hiss of sand blowing across the lot. There was nobody around, not even a stray dog. The place looked like it hadn't seen a customer in days, but the light was on, so I figured it worked. I lifted the nozzle, slid my card in, and started filling up. I leaned against the truck, watching the numbers click by, listening to that slow, hollow sound of gas running down the hose. The desert felt wide open around me, like you could fall straight into that darkness and never hit bottom. I don't know how long I stood there before I noticed the pump. It should have stopped. The gauge said full, but the numbers kept going, slow, steady like a heartbeat. I pressed the lever, but nothing changed. I pulled the nozzle out, expecting fuel to spill, but the hose just hung there, quiet. No sound, the display still rolled on. 3287. 3312. I looked through the office window, thinking maybe someone was inside messing with it, but the place was empty. A single fan turned slow in the back, stirring the dust. There was a calendar on the wall, one of those free ones with a picture of a ranch and some sponsor's name printed at the bottom, but something about it made me stop. The date showing was circled in red ink, June 18th. My throat went dry because that was the day my father had died, almost 10 years before to the day. I hadn't even remembered the date until I saw it there. I could feel my hand shaking as I looked back at the pump. The screen had changed. Instead of the numbers, it was showing that same date, 6/18, over and over again, flickering like a bad bulb. I told myself it was a glitch, some old machine shorting out, but my heart knew better. My dad used to work nights at a gas station outside Van Horn when I was a kid. Sometimes I'd sit out there with him, eating crackers and watching moths hit the light. He'd tell me stories to pass the time. He died behind the counter one night. Heart just gave out before anyone found him. I never did go back to that place, though it wasn't far from here. Maybe that's why the air felt heavy, like the desert itself was holding its breath. I put the nozzle back in the cradle and stepped away, watching that screen glow faint blue in the dark. I thought about going inside, maybe finding a phone, but something in me said not to. I got back in my truck, turned the key, and the engine coughed before catching. The radio came back on, same old song, soft and ghostly through the static. I drove out slow, watching the rearview mirror as the station light shrank behind me until it was just a pinprick in the dark. The road stretched on forever, straight as a string. I passed nothing but scrub and fence posts, the sky wide and starless. I glanced at the fuel gauge, expecting it to drop after a while, but it stayed full. I drove another 30 miles, then another. The needle didn't move. I told myself maybe it was stuck. Maybe the gauge was broken, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't the truck that was wrong. It was the night itself. The farther I went, the quieter it got until even the wind seemed to die, somewhere out there far behind me. I thought I saw a glow, faint and low on the horizon like the station lights still burning. Maybe it was just my eyes playing tricks, or maybe the desert holds on to things longer than it should. By the time I pulled over near a rest stop at dawn, the sky was turning pale gray, and the first birds were calling from the mesquite. I turned off the engine, stepped out, and breathed in the cool air. The world felt empty but clean, like something had passed through it and moved on. I poured the last of my coffee from the thermos and watched the steam drift away. The gauge still showed full, and for a while, I just stood there looking at it, thinking about my dad, about long nights and quiet stations and the sound of a pump clicking in the dark. Sometimes when I drive that stretch again, I look for that place, but it's never there. Folks say it shut down years before that night. Maybe they're right. Maybe I just pulled into some forgotten corner of the world where time runs thin. All I know is that I never paid for that gas and I never ran out. Not once that whole trip. When I think back on it now, sitting here on this porch with the wind moving through the trees, I can almost smell that dust and diesel again. I can hear the low hum of the pump, steady and patient. I don't know what it was trying to tell me, or if it was anything at all. But sometimes in the quiet just before sleep, I see that blue screen in my mind, the numbers gone, only that date blinking, waiting for me to remember. My name is Sharon Hurst, and I'm from Kerrville, Texas. I guess this was about 20 years ago, give or take. I was working for an insurance firm out of San Antonio back then, traveling around the hill country to audit small businesses, motels, feed stores, a few old diners that were still hanging on. It was quiet work, mostly numbers and forms, but I didn't mind it. I liked driving the backroads alone, watching the light change over the hills, that slow gold that comes right before evening. I stayed in a lot of cheap motels back then, the kind with faded curtains and carpet that never really dried after a cleaning. You get used to it. Anyway, there was one place just off Highway 16 right outside Kerrville called the Lone Elm Motel. I remember it because it had this old soda machine under a flickering sign, one of those glass front jobs that buzzed louder than it should have. The owner was a quiet man, polite but tired. Said he kept the rooms clean himself since his wife passed. I didn't think much of it. Just another night on the road. I checked in, made some notes on my clipboard, and sat out front for a while, with a thermos of coffee, watching moths bump into the porch light. The air smelled like rain, and the crickets were going steady in the grass. It felt peaceful in that way only small Texas nights can. Lonely, but familiar. Around 10 or so, I went back inside, took a shower, and laid down. I remember the sound of that soda machine humming through the wall. It wasn't unpleasant, just part of the place. But a little after midnight, I started hearing the clink of coins dropping into it. Not fast, just one at a time, like someone feeding change into the slot, slow and patient. I figured it was one of the truckers from down the hall getting a drink. But it kept going. Every few minutes, another coin. Then the sound of the buttons being pressed, the soft thud of a can falling, and then nothing. Then again. Coins, buttons, thud, over and over. I remember checking the clock, 1:23 a.m., and thinking it was strange anyone would keep buying drinks that late. The machine was right outside my door, behind the thin wall, so I could hear it clear as day. I thought maybe it was jammed, cycling on its own. I told myself I'd mention it to the owner in the morning. I rolled over, tried to sleep, but the noise didn't stop. It just kept on, steady and slow all through the night. Somewhere around 3, I got up and went to the window. The hallway outside was lit by that buzzing soda sign, this dull blue glow spilling in through the curtains. I didn't see anyone, just the machine standing there, humming like always. I thought I saw movement, maybe a shadow passing, but it might have just been the flicker of the light. I went back to bed and tried to ignore it. When I woke up, the sun was just starting to come in through the blinds. Everything was quiet again. I made some coffee from the little packet in the room, packed up my files, and went to pay the bill. The owner looked about the same as before, polite but tired. I mentioned the machine to him, said it must have been stuck or something. He looked at me for a long second, then said, real calm, "Ma'am, that thing's been unplugged for years." I laughed a little, thought he was joking, but he wasn't smiling. Said it broke after his wife passed and he never bothered fixing it. Just left it there because folks were used to seeing it. I didn't say much else. I got in my car and drove off. But when I stopped for gas outside Medina, I reached into my purse for some change to pay for coffee and saw my wallet had been emptied out. Every bit of cash gone, but nothing else missing. The cards were still there, license too. I remember sitting there in that old Ford, holding it open, feeling something I can't quite explain. Not scared exactly, just hollow, like something small and quiet had slipped past me in the night. I thought about turning around, but what would I even say? I just kept driving, and I finished the audit like always. It's funny, though. All these years later, I still think about that sound. The steady drop of coins, the click of those buttons, the thud of a can that never rolled out. I can hear it plain as day, like it's right behind me sometimes when I'm standing by a vending machine or counting change at a gas station. I never use them anymore. Not soda machines, not ice machines, nothing that hums like that. I'll drive an extra mile to find a store if I have to. It's not fear exactly. It's more like respect. Some things in this world just keep taking long after they should have stopped. My name is Eli Grant, and I'm from Gonzales, Texas. I was 22 the summer it happened, though it feels like it could have been 50 years ago. I'd been drifting then, sleeping in the cab of my old Ford, the one with the cracked dashboard and the engine that took 2 tries to start on a good day. I remember the air that night, heavy with heat, thick enough to taste. I'd pulled off near an old church lot on a back road just outside of town, the kind of place you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for somewhere quiet to disappear. The church had been empty for years, maybe decades, with its windows boarded and the steeple long gone. Folks said it burned once, though you couldn't tell anymore except for the black marks along the roof line. I parked there because the sky looked like rain and I was too tired to make it farther. The tar from the road was still warm under my boots when I stepped out, and I could smell it mixing with the dust and the faint sweetness of the mesquite trees. There were crickets, a whole chorus of them, and somewhere out in the dark a dog barked once, then stopped. I leaned on the truck bed, poured myself a bit of coffee from the thermos I carried, and let the quiet settle in around me. That kind of silence, you only hear it in the country, when the day's burned itself out and everything's holding still. The porch light of the old church was still hanging there, bent and rusted, and I remember wondering who'd left it up when the rest of the place had fallen apart. I couldn't tell if it was the wind or something else, but the screen door moved a little, just enough to creak on its hinges. I thought about sleeping inside, out of the rain that hadn't yet started, but something about that door made me pause. Instead, I sat on the truck's tailgate, watching the fields fade into the kind of darkness you can't see through. I must have sat there a long while just listening. The faint hum of my truck's cooling engine, the sound of the crickets thickening like the night was breathing. Then it came. A bell soft and slow, like it was coming from deep under the ground. At first I thought I was hearing things. The church had no tower, no bell, not for as long as I could remember. My granddad used to take me past that place when I was a boy, pointing out how the steeple had been struck by lightning back in his time. The bell had melted down, or so the story went. But that night I heard it plain as day, a single heavy note carrying through the fields. It rang once, then again. The sound had weight to it, like it pulled the air with it each time. I felt it more than I heard it in my chest, steady and slow. I told myself it was a trick of the wind, the way sound travels across flat land at night. I took another sip of coffee, but my hand wasn't steady anymore. The second time it rang, it matched the beat of my heart. Same rhythm, same pause between. That's when I started feeling that crawling kind of unease, the one you can't name but can't shake either. I tried turning on the radio just to break the quiet, but all I got was static and a faint voice I couldn't make out. The signal kept drifting in and out, whispering things that didn't sound like words. I shut it off quick. The air had turned cooler, sharp even, like a storm was rolling in. I remember rubbing my arms, though I don't think it was the cold that got to me. I thought maybe someone else was out there, maybe some old caretaker ringing what was left of a bell somewhere inside. So I took my flashlight and walked toward the church. The beam caught dust floating in the air like fog, and each step on the gravel lot felt louder than it should have been. The door was still swinging slow, the hinges crying out a little each time. I stopped before the porch, and for a second I almost called out, just to say hello to make the night less strange. But I didn't. There was this feeling, like if I said something I'd be answered. And not by a person. I don't know how to explain it better than that. The bell stopped ringing when I got close, and all I could hear was the wind moving through the grass. I stood there, hand on the rail, waiting for something. Nothing came. After a while, I backed away, keeping my light on the church door until I reached the truck again. I started the engine, first try, which never happened, and I sat there, headlights shining over the lot. That's when I saw it. Just faint behind the boards covering the church windows there was light. Not bright, more like candlelight, swaying slow. I told myself it was reflection, maybe my own lights bouncing off the glass, but when I cut the headlights, the glow stayed. I should have driven off right then, but I couldn't. I just sat there watching that faint, flickering light move from one window to another, like someone walking through the place with a lantern. The bell never rang again, but my chest still thumped to that same rhythm, slow and steady, like it was answering something I couldn't hear anymore. When the rain finally came, it came hard. I watched it wash across the windshield, blurring everything until the light disappeared. I must have fallen asleep sitting up because when I woke, the sun was up and the church looked just as it always had. Quiet, empty, boards still nailed tight. I walked up to the porch again just to see for myself. The door was shut this time, locked with a rusted chain I hadn't noticed before. The lot smelled like wet tar and cedar, and the ground was soft where my boots sank a little. I don't know why, but I looked up where the steeple should have been, and for a moment I swore I heard the faintest echo of that bell again. Just one note, far off and fading. I left Gonzales not long after. Spent years drifting from town to town, working when I could, sleeping where it was quiet. But sometimes, when I pass a church alone on a back road, especially if the air's still and the sky's waiting for rain, I feel that same pull in my chest, like something slow and patient is listening for me. I don't tell people about that night anymore. They just nod and say I was tired or dreaming. Maybe I was. But every now and then when I try to pray, when I really sit down and speak quiet into the dark, I hear it again. That slow, heavy ringing. Just once, then nothing. And I can't shake the feeling that it's not a memory I carry, but something that's still happening. Somewhere out there, waiting for me to listen. My name is Margie Doss, and I'm from Blooming Grove, Texas. I was born there in '59, back when the highway still curved through town instead of around it. And the old diner outside Corsicana still had that big neon sign that buzzed all night, spelling out "Eat" in tired red letters. I worked there when I was young, back when my hands didn't shake pouring coffee and the jukebox still played songs about the kind of love folks used to believe would last forever. The smell of frying oil and truck exhaust clung to everything in that place, even your hair. And by the time you walked out at closing, you could feel the grease on your skin and the day heavy on your shoulders. My husband Earl used to come by after his shift at the mill. He'd sit at the counter, order the same thing every night, chicken fried steak and black coffee, and wait for me to clock out. He never said much, but he'd tap his ring against the counter while I finished wiping things down. And that little sound always told me I wasn't alone. He passed in '97. Heart just gave out while he was changing a tire on the side of Highway 31. After that, I stopped driving at night for a long while. It was maybe 10 years later when I started going out again, usually just to clear my head. I'd take the back roads through Navarro County, down where the mesquite trees lean in close and the fences all sag like tired shoulders. I liked the quiet of it, the way the air smelled like dust and grass. Sometimes when the night got too still, I'd turn on the AM radio just to have a voice beside me, static mostly, with bits of weather reports and old country songs fading in and out like ghosts. One night in early spring, I was heading back from visiting my sister in Dawson, and I saw that old diner again, sitting lonely off the highway. It had been closed for years, but someone had turned the lights on. The big "Eat" sign was half lit, buzzing the way it used to when I was young. I pulled into the gravel lot before I really thought about it. The gravel made that familiar crunch under my tires, and I swear I could smell the fryer before I even stepped out. When I walked in, the place looked just like I remembered. Same cracked counter, same red stools with the vinyl peeling on the edges, even the same clock above the register that hadn't worked since I was 23. There was a young woman behind the counter, wiping it down with a rag that looked too clean for a place like that. She smiled when she saw me, said, "Evening, Earl." Just like that. I froze a little, thought maybe I'd misheard her. I told her my name, said she must be mistaken, but she just smiled again and poured me a cup of coffee without asking how I took it. It was black. Earl's way, I sat down at the same stool he used to, figuring maybe I was tired or maybe she'd just heard wrong. The coffee was warm, tasted like it had been sitting too long, but it felt good in my hands. I asked her when they'd reopened, and she said, "Oh, we never closed. Folks just stopped coming for a while." I didn't know what to make of that, but I nodded, trying not to stare too much at how the light over her head kept flickering, humming louder than I remembered. Outside, the wind picked up, and I could hear the screen door creak every few seconds like it was breathing. She went to the back for a moment, said she had to get my receipt, and I watched the room while she was gone. Everything was too still, like the air didn't move right. The napkin holder on the counter had a bit of dust on it, but the counter itself was spotless. The radio behind her played something low, a man singing, but the words didn't sound like any song I knew. When she came back, she handed me a little slip of paper. No total on it, just the words, "See you soon," written in neat handwriting that looked too familiar. I wanted to ask what she meant, but before I could, I heard something behind me. Just a soft cough, like someone clearing their throat. I turned, but there wasn't anybody there. The booths were empty. The windows too dark to see through, but for a second I could have sworn I saw the reflection of a man sitting beside me. Just a shape, nothing clear. I didn't wait to finish my coffee. I set it down, still half full, and walked out into the cool air. The porch light buzzed above me, and I remember thinking how quiet it was for that time of year. When I looked back from my truck, the lights inside were off. No sound, no movement, just the wind through the weeds that had grown up around the parking lot. I drove home slow, kept the radio off. My hands were shaking when I got in, so I sat on the porch for a long time, listening to the cicadas and the hum of the transformer down the road. I told myself it was just a dream, or maybe my mind playing tricks. But when I checked my purse the next morning, the receipt was still there, folded neat, with that same message, "See you soon." The handwriting looked like Earl's. I kept it for a while, tucked in my Bible where I wouldn't have to see it unless I wanted to. Some nights when the wind gets that certain sound, low and steady like a truck idling far off, I'll think about that place. I still drive past it sometimes. The building's gone now, burned down or torn down, I'm not sure which. But when the sky's right just before dawn, I can see the faint red glow of that old sign hanging in the air where it used to be. The highway's quieter these days, but sometimes I swear I can still smell the coffee and hear that ring tapping against the counter. I don't stop anymore. Just keep driving. Slow, with the window cracked enough to let the wind in, and I try not to look too long. Some things are better seen once and remembered quiet. My name is Pauline Hicks, and I'm from Sweetwater, Texas. I used to work for the Department of Transportation, mostly surveying old back roads that nobody really used anymore, stretches of asphalt that had gone soft under the sun and cracked like old skin. I was 28 back then. Still thought I'd make a life out of work that kept me moving, kept me out where the land went on forever. I remember that August in particular because the heat had that heavy stillness to it, the kind that presses down and makes you quiet without meaning to. I'd fill my thermos with coffee every morning before sunrise, drive the company truck out past Nolan County where the old gas route ran parallel to the new highway. It was one of those forgotten roads. No stations left, just weathered signs and leaning poles humming under the lines. The asphalt had faded to a chalky gray, and most days I wouldn't see another vehicle the whole time I was out there. I liked it that way at first. There was a calm to it. Just me. The dust. The sound of the wind tapping at the truck mirror. Sometimes I'd leave the door open while I worked so I could hear the radio drift in and out. Some old AM station with static and the faint voice of a preacher somewhere between towns. I'd mark down coordinates, take a few photos, check for structural wear. Same routine every day. It felt steady, safe. One afternoon, the light was real strange. The air had that yellow tint that comes before a storm, though the sky itself looked clear. I set up my drone near what used to be a service station, just a slab now and a rusted sign with no letters left on it. The wind was picking up just enough to make the mesquite whisper. I sent the drone out to map the stretch between mile markers 14 and 19. A lonely 5-mile run of cracked pavement that had been closed for decades. I remember watching the little screen, the camera gliding over the empty road. The image was still and pale, like the world had gone quiet on purpose. Then as the drone shadow crossed into frame, I saw something move beside it. At first I thought it was me, maybe my own shadow distorted by the angle, but it wasn't. It was another shape, right next to it, moving when mine didn't. A figure thin and still, almost the same height as me, but just slightly wrong, like it leaned the wrong way with the wind. I told myself it was a glitch. Heat shimmer, maybe. I let it go, finished the run, packed up my gear, and drove back toward town. That night after dinner, I pulled up the footage on my laptop just to check. I told myself it was work. Always better to review data before turning it in. But truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about that flicker. I slowed the video down frame by frame. The drone shadow passed over a cracked patch of asphalt, and beside it, clear as anything, another shadow, standing where nothing should have been. When my shadow moved, that one didn't. Then, just for a moment, it lifted an arm and waved. Not a frantic motion, not even a full wave, just a slow rise of the hand like someone recognizing you from across a parking lot. I must have watched it 50 times, trying to see if maybe the drone's propeller caught a reflection or the lens glitched. But every time it looked the same. The shadow wasn't me, and it wasn't a trick of light. I didn't tell anyone. Not at first. Folks around here don't take kindly to stories that sound like imagination, and I didn't want to be the strange girl with the ghost film. I figured it was something technical, maybe a reflection off the drone body, but still, I couldn't shake the feeling that it had known I was there. A few days later, I went back out to that same stretch, mostly just to prove to myself it was nothing. The air smelled like rain and dust, that sharp metallic scent that hits before a storm. I parked near the same slab where the gas station used to stand. My boots sank a little in the soft dirt as I walked out. Everything was still, no cars, no birds, just that hum from the power lines above. I stood there a long time watching the road. You ever notice how silence can start to feel like it's listening back? That's how it felt. Like the land itself was waiting on me to say something. I sent the drone up again. It climbed steady, and the feed came through clear. I was watching the screen when the image froze for half a second. Just a stutter, then it picked up again. But the road looked different. There was something dark lying near the center line, stretched long. For a moment I thought it was a shadow again, but the sun was too high for it to fall that way. I blinked, looked up, and the road was empty. When I looked back at the screen, the image had caught up. No dark shape, just open asphalt. I brought the drone down, packed up, and drove home without saying a word. That night I dreamed about that road. Not the way it was, but the way it must have been back when people still drove it. Gas pumps lit, a man in a hat washing his windshield, kids in the back seat with sodas. But there was something wrong with the sky in that dream. Too still, too pale, like the air didn't move at all. I woke up before dawn, sweating even though the room was cool. I made coffee and sat on the porch listening to the cicadas starting up in the mesquite. I thought about going back out there, but something in me said not to. The job didn't feel the same after that. Every road I surveyed felt just a little too quiet, every field too wide. I started noticing things in the corner of my vision. A shape beside the truck window, a figure far out in the grass that disappeared when I turned my head. I told myself I was tired, overworked. When I finally quit, I didn't even give a reason. Just handed in my badge and said I was done with open roads. They told me it was a shame. I had promised, they said, but I didn't care. I moved back to Sweetwater, took a desk job at the courthouse, and stayed mostly indoors. It's been years now, but every once in a while when the wind comes in from the west and the power lines hum just right, I still see that old road in my mind. I can picture the cracked asphalt, the drone shadow sliding across it, and that other shape standing just beside it, waiting. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, watching the empty road like it's waiting for me to come back. I don't show that footage anymore. I don't even know where the drive ended up. But every time I take a drive west of town, I keep my eyes on the new highway, never the side roads, because deep down I know that old stretch is still there, quiet, patient, and empty, and whatever I caught in its shadow is still waving. My name is Tommy Greer, and I'm from Livingston, Texas. I was born just a few miles out past the Pine Line, down near the lake where the fog sits heavy most mornings, especially come late October. I've been fishing that water near about my whole life. My daddy taught me when I was no taller than the cooler he used to carry his bait in, and after he passed, I kept on going down there, partly out of habit, partly because it was the only place that still felt like him. I used to tell folks the lake changes when the fog rolls in. Sound carries different, closer, like the whole world's leaning in to listen. That's where this story starts. A few years back, I bought myself a used aluminum boat off a fella from Jasper. Old Mercury motor, little dent in the side where he'd hit a stump, but she ran fine. I kept her down by the launch off FM 350, tied to a post I'd driven in myself. Every morning before work, I'd go out there, take a thermos of coffee, and fish an hour or two before the sun burned through the mist. Those were quiet mornings, the kind where you can hear the hum of a porch light a mile away and the water lapping soft against the hull. That was my peace, you know? Just me, the fog, and the slow rhythm of the lake. Then one morning I got there a little before daylight, and something felt different. The air had that damp chill that gets under your shirt, and there was the stillness, like everything was waiting. When I went to untie the rope, I noticed it. 2 handprints right there on the front of the boat, clear as day. Small, maybe like a woman's, pressed into the dew on the aluminum. Fresh. You could see where the moisture had smudged under the palms, like someone had just leaned there, looking down into the water. I figured maybe kids or somebody fooling around, but it got to me. Just a little. It wasn't the kind of place people hung around at night. Just woods, water, and one busted streetlight flickering over the gravel. I wiped the prints off, climbed in, and tried not to think much of it. Fishing was slow that morning, and the fog never lifted right. It stayed thick like it had weight to it. And every now and then I'd think I saw shapes moving on the shore. Not people exactly, just a sense that something was there watching. When I got back to the ramp, I pulled the boat up and went to unhook the line. And I'll be damned if those same prints weren't back again. Same size, same place, like they'd never been wiped away. I stood there for a long minute, just staring. The water was calm, the kind that doesn't even ripple unless something breaks it. And I swear I heard a sound, soft, like a breath coming up from underneath the hull. Not bubbles, not fish, just air slow and steady. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the metal cooling, maybe my nerves. I packed up, drove home, and tried to shake it off. But it kept happening. Every morning after that, new prints. Always wet, always clean, like whoever or whatever was leaving them had just come out of the water. I even started checking before sunrise, thinking I might catch somebody there, but the place was always empty. You ever feel a kind of quiet that's too deep? Like even the crickets know better than to make noise? That's how it started feeling down there. The coffee in my thermos started tasting like the lake, stale and metallic, and the air had that sour smell of old motor oil and wet wood. One morning I went out there and found more than just the prints. There was a trail of them this time. Small, bare feet leading from the shoreline right up to the back of my truck. They stopped at the tire, turned around, and went back toward the water. No other marks. No drag lines, no slipping in the mud. Just perfect impressions like someone had stepped out, then gone home. I didn't fish that morning. I just sat on the tailgate and watched the fog move. I could hear things shifting under the surface, gentle splashes like something circling. The longer I sat, the more I felt it. This pull, like the water, wanted me closer. The fog had that milky look, and for a moment I could have sworn I saw a figure standing out there, just past the reeds, too still to be real. I called out, but the sound didn't carry. It felt swallowed, like the lake didn't want to give it back. I left my gear that day, just drove home in silence. The next morning, when I finally went back, my boat was half sunk. The rope was still tied, but she'd taken on water, slow and steady. And those same prints were there on the inside of the hull, right by where the seat should have been. I remember touching one. It was cold, colder than the metal around it, and dry, like it had been burned in somehow. I drained her out, patched what I could, but it didn't matter. Every time I took her out after that, I felt wrong. Like I wasn't alone, not really. Sometimes when I cut the motor and just drifted, I'd hear a sound from under the seat. Soft knocking, spaced like breathing. Once I dipped my hand over the side and the water felt warm, like someone had just been there. After a while, I stopped going altogether. Sold the boat to a man out in Corrigan. He called me a few weeks later, asked if I'd noticed the prints thing. Said he couldn't keep them off either. I told him to let it go, sell it if he could, and he got quiet after that. Never heard from him again. I still drive past that launch sometimes. The post I tied to is still there, half buried in mud, and the streetlight still flickers the same way. Every now and then, when the fog's low, I see something on the water. A little shimmer like hands pressing up from underneath. I don't stop anymore. I just keep driving, windows up, radio low. Some nights I wake up smelling that same damp air, hearing the small knock of water on metal like it's right outside the window. I haven't been fishing since. Truth is, I don't even like washing my hands in the sink too long anymore. Feels like something might take hold if I stay there. I don't tell this to many people. Most wouldn't believe it, and that's fine. Maybe there's nothing to believe. But I know what I saw and what I felt, and it stayed with me all these years. Some things you don't have to understand to know they're real. You just feel them, quiet and steady, waiting. Like the fog over Livingston Lake, thick and patient, never really gone, just out there breathing. My name is Ray Molina and I'm from Goliad, Texas. I'll say it the way I'd say it to a good friend on a summer night when the porch light hums over our heads and the screen door gives a soft little creak each time the wind thinks about coming in, while a thermos of coffee warms my hands and my dusty boots sit by the door, so I don't track the yard across my mother's old linoleum. I'm past the part of life where I feel any need to hurry a story. So you'll have to take this the way it comes, slow and steady, with the air smelling like rain on dirt even if the clouds keep walking on by and the cicadas make that high, steady sound that never quite lets go. And if the AM radio on the counter fades in and out because a storm is wandering around somewhere between here and Beeville, well, that's part of it too. I worked most of my years as a night clerk and then manager for a little roadside motel that once sat on the old highway east of town. The kind of place with a dozen low rooms, a neon sign that lost its middle letter sometime in the 80s so it just blinked M-Tel in a tired red rhythm, and a patch of St. Augustine grass we kept going with a hose and stubbornness through August and into September. Folks passing through would ask if it had always been quiet like that, and I'd laugh because quiet moves around. Some nights it piles up on the porch like an old dog, and some nights you can't find it anywhere and you start to wonder if silence has up and left the state. Back then I drove a '75 Chevy that needed a prayer and 2 turns of the key to catch, and most mornings before I lay down I could still hear the engine in my bones. Like the road meant to keep me up a while longer. I kept my truck clean the way some men keep their hats clean, meaning I didn't quite manage it, but the effort made me feel like I was still paying attention to something that deserved it. The motel had a little bell on the office door, a single high note with a ring to it that stayed in the air after the glass settled back in the frame, and the porch light over that door was the kind that hummed in a way you could feel in your teeth if you stood under it too long. Moths circling, little bugs tapping the lens with that hollow sound like a fingernail on a coffee cup. The air out there always had a hint of creosote from the old fence timbers, and the damp metal smell that comes off a soda machine nobody can quite retire. With a row of buttons for flavors that had stopped being popular even before the kids on bikes started coming around for Gatorade. Nights found a shape out there. Far-off thunder that sounded like it had no interest in getting closer. Trucks downshifting beyond the tree line. A coyote calling to what you hoped was another coyote and not just the dark itself. I don't tell this to make it sound pretty. I tell it because it's true. And because the truth of that place sits under what happened like a good board under a floor, steady and quiet and there whether you think about it or not. When I started at the motel, I was young enough to feel restless and old enough to know better. And I liked the night because it had a way of minding its own business. Folks came through who didn't want to talk, which is fine. Folks came through who wanted to talk too much, which is fine too if you learn how to nod in a way that empties the room without shutting a door. I learned to keep a thermos full for myself and a little pot on for whoever put a couple of bills in the jar. And I learned that a slow AM radio can tell you what the weather's about to do before the sky does, so long as you listen to the way a song falls apart into static and then finds itself again. The motel records were kept in a ledger that took both hands to carry, and every month the owner's sister would come by to write names in that careful block print of hers, lips moving along with the numbers like she was keeping count with her mouth. Rooms had keys, real ones with thick plastic fobs that clacked together in the drawer like bones if you pulled it too fast. I can still feel the weight of those keys, cool in the palm in August and warm in January, like they'd had their own weather inside the drawer. I loved that small work, the way sweeping the office could make you feel like a place might keep you if you kept it, and the way locking up felt like blessing a house at night. Most nights passed the way a creek passes under a bridge, steady and unremarked, with a few fireflies drifting slow over the ditch beyond the parking lot, and a single late car's headlights writing quick bright lines on the office wall. Then one summer, not the hottest and not the wettest, but the one where the grass didn't give up until Thanksgiving, things started to get loose around the edges in a way I didn't have language for. It was August because the pecans were still green, and the evenings had that heavy sweetness to them, the kind that makes you tired in the neck and shoulders. A little after midnight the bell rang and a man about my age set down a duffel and asked for a room away from the ice machine. He paid in cash, counted slow, and I gave him key 7, which was far enough that the hum from the sign barely made it through the wall. He thanked me, took his receipt, and then he did a thing I cannot forget no matter how many years I try. He set the key back on the counter, pushed it toward me with 2 fingers, and asked softly, and with no push in it at all, if I had another key for the same room, because he didn't want to be the only one who could open it. I made a joke about spare keys, and he shook his head and said, "No, not like that." And he tapped the number 7 with his knuckle and said, "I just want to know it's not only mine. People ask for all kinds of things at a motel. I've had folks want a room with a window that faces east. Folks want their coffee in a plastic cup instead of styrofoam. Folks want a chair that doesn't face the TV. But I had never had a man ask to not be the only one who could let himself into his own space. I told him the truth, which was that we had a master key that could open anything, and he relaxed a hair like I'd told him what he needed to hear. He left, and the office went quiet in that motel way where you can hear the cold machine in the soda chest switching on and off and the little tick the clock makes when the second hand hits certain painted dashes. I wrote his name in the book with the rest and set the key drawer at an angle so I could see if anyone tried to slip a hand in there without me noticing, which nobody ever did. The AM radio faded, found itself, and faded again. The rain smell was out there, pulling at the dust, but the clouds had lost interest in us. A few hours later, no more than 2 because the coffee in my cup was still warm, I heard the screen door creak on room 7. It's a particular sound when you know a place. Not just any screen door, but that one with the hinge that insists on taking its time. I looked over the parking lot through the office window and saw his door open a few inches. No light came on. I got up and stood with my hand on the office knob, not opening it, feeling the slickness the night air puts on metal. The door to 7 stayed half open for a long minute, then closed slowly as if a tired person were being careful not to wake someone else. I waited. The cicadas kept on. Far-off thunder did what it does. I sat back down. Maybe 20 minutes after that, the same door opened, a little wider this time, and I saw a shape lean out just enough to put a shoulder into the air, then pull back in. I told myself a lot of things. I told myself it was the heat, that the air in those rooms can get thick as syrup and sometimes you have to let the night in so you can breathe like a normal person. I told myself I could check on him in a few minutes after he was settled. I told myself things because there's dignity in not getting in folks' way. And because once you start moving towards something you can't explain, it's hard to stop without having to admit what it was you were moving toward. I wrote down the time. I do that even now when a moment sits up and looks at me in that quiet way. I write down the time and pretend it's just a habit. The clock said 2:11. Now, I don't like to take a story up into the air when it's happiest closer to the ground, but you need me to tell you how the room numbers worked out there. The motel was built in a day when people meant for things to get used right, so the rooms were numbered in order from the office down to the end, and there was an old rule that we'd keep 7 empty if we could when the month turned. Because for the first week of any month, we'd get a lot of late-night walk-ins, and 7 was easy for me to watch from the office window, without leaning over or making a show of it. A room you can keep an eye on saves you trouble you don't have to write down, so 7 had a life of its own in the books. A little run of empties when the calendar clicked. I had always liked that about it. It felt like a breath held on purpose. I tell you that because it makes what happened next feel like a thing that had been waiting for its chance. At 2:15, the bell on the office door didn't ring, but I felt in my chest that it could have, the way you feel something without hearing it. And I looked up and saw a woman in the glass. Not in the office, but in the reflection from the lot, standing a few feet outside in a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, hands at her sides like someone being very polite in a new place. Reflections at night do what they want. They take a thin slice of the world and hold it wrong. I set my coffee down, picked up the flashlight that lived under the counter, and stepped out into the night air. The porch light hummed at me the way it always did. The woman was not there. The parking lot was as empty as a plate after Sunday supper. I could hear the incline where the highway lifted over the creek, trucks making that soft note as they crossed. Room 7's door was closed. A moth struck the light above me and fell into a wide, slow circle, then found its shape again and went at the lens like a duty. I stood there longer than made sense and looked at the spot where she would have been if what I saw in the glass had been the regular kind of reflection. I thought maybe my own face had made me think of hers, some trick of age and glass and a tired mind. I told myself to sit back down. When I did, the AM radio had fallen into a soft wash that sounded like a creak and a whisper at the same time, and where a station ought to have been, there was only a breath. Not mine and not the night's either. I turned the knob. It didn't matter. The breath kept its place on the dial. I switched the radio off. The air in the office felt like a room that had been recently left by someone who meant to return. A chair carries the weight of a person for a while after they're gone. You know that feeling. I stayed until sunrise, and then I took the ledger and wrote a long note to myself about checking the wiring and the hinge on 7. The kind of note that gives a shape to a night that doesn't want to keep one. The man returned the key around 8, set it on the counter and said thank you with that quiet voice good enough men use when they're not sure they'll be heard. He did not look like he slept. He asked if anyone had knocked on his door. I said no. He nodded like I'd given him the last piece of something heavy he was trying to carry out to his truck, and he left. Days have their own way of closing a lid over what the night left open. I watered the grass and the hose hissed where it kinked, and a dog I didn't know trotted past with no hurry to it at all. The porch light went cold in the morning sun and looked cleaner than it ever does in the dark. I let it all be, because what else can you do? A week passed like a slow song. We had a full house on Thursday with a church group heading north, and a salesman whose car made a complaining sound when he turned it off. The smell of rain kept making promises it didn't keep. 7 stayed empty for 3 nights in a row, for no reason I can write down. The ledger doesn't show the reason a thing chooses its day. On the 4th night, 2 teenagers drove in with a flat tire and a look that said they'd never learned the right way to ask for help. I took the jack from my truck and changed the tire under the porch light, while they stood there holding the lug nuts like they were afraid they'd lose them under the car. The porch light hummed louder when I stepped on the concrete line where the office met the lot. When the spare was on, I told them to take it slow and check it again at the gas station down the road, and they thanked me with the sort of relief that makes older people feel useful for a while. When the car pulled out, I glanced up and saw that room 7's curtain had moved. Just a small, tidy shift like a person giving way to another person in a narrow hall. I knew that room was empty. I had a habit back then of checking empty rooms myself. I didn't like surprises. That curtain made a small fold, then settled back the way fabric does when nobody touches it for a while. I walked down the row with the flashlight even though I didn't need it, because a flashlight makes a person feel like he's carrying a say in how the dark behaves. The key slid in and turned, and the door opened on cool air that smelled like cleaner and a little dust. The bed was made the way anyone would make it. Not a housekeeper, but me, with a strong tuck and a clean pillowcase, and the bathroom light was off and the tap had its steady, polite drip that won't stop no matter how you fuss with it. The screen door creaked when I opened it, because nothing in that place was going to lie about the years. I stood a while and let my eyes get used to that kind of dark, the easy kind that's just a room with the lights off. The thing about 7 was not the bed or the curtain or the shape of the chair. It was the space by the wall where the air felt like a place someone had stood every day for a year. A softened square. An indentation that wasn't visible, but honest anyway. Most rooms had their own worn places. 7's was different. It felt ready in a way I don't have a good word for. I left the door open and stepped back out to the air, and in the corner of my eye I saw the curtain breathe once and fall back flat. Someone might say it was the porch light drawing bugs up against the screen. Someone might say a pressure change came through when the highway sent a big truck over the creek. Those would be good things to say, and I wish they helped. They don't bring me any closer to what I felt. Nights followed, and what had begun as small off notes became part of the song. Once, the AM radio in the office spoke my name in a regular voice, mine, and I was in the room and I had not said it. It was just the one word, Ray, with the sound I give it when I'm telling myself not to forget the ice. I turned the dial and found a baseball game. The Jaguaries playing somebody and the announcer in that good loose mood when a low-scoring day has started to tilt. I tried to pretend I'd imagined it, but I keep a clean line in my head between imaginations and what's in the room with me. Another time I heard the ice machine take a breath when the compressor kicked on, and the breath had too many parts. Like 2 people went to tell the same joke at once. I stood out in the lot and listened and could not catch it again. But a second sound hangs in the air longer than a first sound, and I felt it on my arms like a soft static. Once, toward 3 in the morning when you can feel your good sense straining to stay up, I watched the neon motels sign blink in a new rhythm it had never learned before. 3 quick pulses and a hold, 3 quick pulses and a hold, like it had finally decided to send a signal to something nobody else cared to understand. These aren't the sort of things you tell right away. I kept them between me and the ledger, and when I wrote them down, I wrote about door hinges and bulbs. A person learns not to scare himself with his own handwriting. We had a woman who drove produce twice a week between Harlingen and San Antonio, who liked room 4 because it shared a wall with the laundry, and the warmth from the dryers went into the floor. She was the kind of person who doesn't get mixed up, who keeps a set of ratchets in a neat roll behind the seat. She came in one night looking a shade off center, asked for 4, and when I slid the key across, she asked if I ever heard the phones ring in the rooms that don't have phones anymore. I told her no, because there hadn't been phones in those rooms for 10 years, and I didn't like to put ideas in people's heads. She took the key and gave me a look like we were choosing not to say something out loud. She came back an hour later with her hair tied up and asked if I'd mind putting a coffee in a paper cup for her. The thermos kind made the coffee taste like pennies. I poured and we stood there listening to the radio, not quite catching a station. She held the cup with both hands and said someone in the room had said her name while she washed her face. Not loud and not soft. Just the way a person says your name when they've known you a long time and finally found you again. She didn't ask me to come check. She didn't say she was scared. She said she was tired and she hoped I didn't have to stay there all night by myself without talking back to things that wouldn't stop being polite. That was the word she used, polite. I told her she could leave the key on the counter in the morning and that I'd draw the curtains in 4 before noon because the sun wore that room out faster than the rest. She nodded and we let the night be. The way you do when it has the drop on you and there's no use in fussing. It went on like that for a while. Little changes kept coming like the dust that drifts under a door no matter how much weather strip you put down. I started going everywhere with a thermos even if I didn't need one. Something about the heft of it gave me a spoken kind of comfort. The way a man will carry his hat in his hand rather than put it down when he knows he'll need to leave soon. The porch light took to flickering in a way I could time with my breath if I tried. And the screen door hinge learned a new sound. A small lift at the end of the creak like it wanted to say something else and decided against it. And I, who am a slow learner with fast eyes, understood I was not alone out there. Not the regular kind of alone. And that whatever kept me company was older than me and unhurried. A storm finally came late one night, not with drama but with intention. The first drops hit so far apart you could hear each one meet the concrete. Then they gathered themselves and walked across the lot together. The ditch filled and the smell of rain on dirt became the smell of wet grass and cooled dust, and the metal hum of the sign went different, lower, as if it were relieved to share the weight of the air with something else. The AM radio found a preacher out of Victoria, who spoke softly about patience, and a woman called in to ask for prayers for her sister, who hadn't left the house in months. And the preacher said he would, and then went silent for longer than made sense, like he was counting to a number only he knew. The phone on the office desk rang right then. Nobody ever called that phone except the owner or his sister or the highway patrol. I picked it up and said motel like I always do. The line had that sound to it that lets you know a person is already on the other end, thinking about how to speak. Not yet breathing into your ear, but there all the same. I said hello again. The person at the other end said my name, the way a far relative would, warm and careful, and I said yes and waited. And then the line gave me a long wash of nothing that wasn't really nothing, and the person said, with my own voice, "Don't stand under the porch light." I looked up because that is what we do when a word says the name of what's above us, and the porch light hummed so steady it sounded like a field full of crickets. I took a step to the side and the hum changed, a small wobble at the top of it like a bowl ringing. The line went dead. It didn't occur to me then to be afraid the way the movies teach you to be afraid. It is a new and private thing when something uses your voice to take care of you. I turned the light off and stood there in the dark with the rain moving in sheets and the thunder counting out its own measures, and I felt the night settle into a different posture, closer, attentive. I put the thermos on the counter and listened to the rain hit the screen of room 7, like rice on a roof after a wedding. The door to 7 opened and closed once, politely, like a person deciding not to step out after all. The curtain didn't move. I went down and stood outside the door and knocked with my knuckle the way you do when you aren't trying to make a point. I said, "Sir, if you need anything," and nobody answered, and I don't know if it would have mattered if they had. After that night, I began to hear the motel differently. The wood in the office spoke at times with a soft crease of sound, as if a hand had pressed down and then slid away. The ice machine learned to breathe between compressions. The soda machine's click became a little cue I could count on, like a metronome that reminded me to stand up and walk from window to window with no real plan in mind. The ledger pages turned easier. paper edges finding my fingertip as if they had been oiled. I learned to look for the part of the air that wasn't moving and stand near it, the way a man will put his back to a wall in a noisy room and feel better for it. I did not say anything to the owner. He would have told me to take 2 days and clear my head, and I didn't want 2 days. I wanted the slow company of what was learning my name. If you're waiting for a moment where a door slammed or a figure stood in the doorway and asked for something it had no right to ask for, I don't have that for you. What I have is a kind of patience that isn't mine. It spread from the rooms into me until my voice took on a pace I didn't choose, and I found myself telling people to drive slow in the morning because the fog down by the creek had ideas of its own. I found myself setting a second cup beside my own on the counter at night, not full and not empty, a gesture more than anything else. And when I did that, the air in the office felt like it nodded. It's foolishness to some people and prayer to others, setting a place for what you can't see, and I won't argue either way. One late September evening, a man from Shiner came in with a toolbox and asked to borrow a lamp because the one in his room had a bad switch. I keep a box of spares under the counter, and I handed him one that I knew worked because I'd used it myself at Christmas when I stayed there too late to justify the drive home. He came back 10 minutes later and asked for another, said the first one worked fine in the office but wouldn't come on in the room. I gave him another and he thanked me, and this time I walked out to the lot with him in that easy way of mine, not to prove anything, just to see what the air had to say about it all. We went into 7 and the first lamp, which he'd set on the dresser, clicked on before he touched it, washed the room with the small, polite kind of light a motel lamp knows how to make, and then clicked off. He laughed, the way men do when a thing surprises them without making them mad. And then he stopped laughing because something about the click felt like a person with good manners settling into a chair. He said not to me exactly, go ahead, and the lamp clicked on again and stayed. Sometimes it takes 2 people to introduce a third who doesn't care to say much. He slept that night and brought both lamps back in the morning and said thank you for the help. And he used my name without looking at my name tag. And that's nothing. And it's also not nothing. By October, I had come to understand that the motel didn't hold a single story so much as it held a way of speaking. The boards and wires and screens and keys had tuned themselves to a voice nobody taught them. And that voice was the same one that had said my name on the AM radio and had told me not to stand under the porch light that night. It wasn't mine even if it used mine. It wasn't asking for anything except that I notice it, and I did. I know better than to go get dramatic about such things, but I started writing small notes in the margins of the ledger that didn't have to do with broken locks or men who smoked in non-smoking rooms. I wrote things like 4 a.m. The rain talked to itself by the vending machine, and room 7, please and thank you. If you asked me who I was thanking, I couldn't tell you. If you pressed me and asked what I had been spared by not standing under the porch light, I couldn't tell you that either. I can only say that on the few nights I forgot and stood there anyway, I felt a pressure in my chest that wasn't fear exactly, but a kind of loneliness, like sliding a chair back from a table that only ever had one setting. Around that time, I took to visiting the creek at noon when the day was too bright to hold anything but itself. I'd park the Chevy where the dirt road widened and walk down past the culvert with a cup of coffee that had gone from hot to warm to something in between. And I'd stand under the little bridge where the cool air lives and listen to the water, make the same soft adjustments it's made since before the town had a name. It steadied me to stand with something that never pretended to be more than it was. On those days, I'd come back to the motel and the sign would be off because the sun made it look stupid, and I'd open the office and the air would meet me like a dog that has learned not to jump up, but still wags in a way that says, "It remembers you." I'd put my dusty boots by the door, because even though the floor wasn't my mother's, habits keep us at the right temperature inside ourselves. People move on and places do not. That winter, the owner sold the motel to a man who wanted to tear it down and put up storage units because the highway had cruelly moved, and no one wanted a room in a place that didn't have a reason to wake up anymore. The owner said it was progress, and I nodded because I was tired and because I had learned that arguing with progress makes a person hoarse and thirsty, and nothing else. They gave me 2 weeks to wind it down. I walked the rooms and gathered the lamps that had been kind to me and set aside a chair whose arms had listened to people for a long time, and I took the fobs off the keys and put them in a coffee can. And I turned off the sign for what I thought might be the last time and stood in the lot with the darkness, which had not changed, and the night sounds, which had not changed, and my own voice in my chest, which felt like a borrowed tool I would soon have to return. I slept in 7 the last 2 nights. I did not turn on the TV. I did not set the lamp higher than I needed to see the book I was pretending to read. The curtain shifted the way it does when somebody you like comes and stands beside you and doesn't need to say anything. The rain began to patter on the screen and then quit, not sorry at all for coming and not staying. I heard a name said softly once in the air near the dresser. Not mine and not anybody I know, but I understood that the speaking of it was less about the person than about the act of remembering. Voices are bridges. Knowing that didn't make me smarter or braver. It made me sad in the quiet way that feels like putting down a box before you set it on a shelf, because you need a breath. The morning the machines came, I came early and made a pot of coffee that tasted a little like cardboard, and I drank it anyway because it was morning and the office had earned the smell. I wrote in the ledger for the last time, a line that read close with care, and I took the ledger home and set it on a shelf where nothing else had been, and it stayed there like a stone that knows its own weight. They took the rooms down in an afternoon. The machines went through the walls like men through a conversation they didn't want to have. Dust rose and settled on the lot and the ditch and on my truck like the past had come loose and was looking for a place to fall. I stood by the road and watched until it was not the motel anymore, but a large gray thought with corners in it. And when the machine took the office down, the bell on the door gave one last thin ring whose echo did not have time or room to go anywhere. The sign was the last thing to go. They dug up the posts and set it on its side and unbolted the letters, and the man doing it looked at me like maybe he'd give me one for my trouble. I shook my head. Some souvenirs don't know how to behave once you take them home. In the months after, I found I could still drive out there and sit by the patch of dirt where 7 used to be. The ground knew. The ground always knows. The storage units went up clean and quick. Blue doors and white numbers, each one a small square that didn't want to talk to the next. People rented them and filled them the way we do. The way we make little rooms out of our lives to hold what we can't bring ourselves to either keep or let go. I got a job at the feed store and learned a different kind of quiet. The daytime kind with radios on low and pallet jacks skidding a little on smooth concrete. And I go home earlier now while the sun still has work to do. And I sit on my porch and listen to a radio that fades when the weather thinks about changing. I don't turn the porch light on unless I need it. And if I step out under it, I step to the side because old advice in my own voice is still advice. Sometimes I drive past the units in the late afternoon, and I swear there's a light still on somewhere around where 7 was. Not a bulb and not sunlight either. A steady presence the size of a chair, the size of a polite word, the size of a name said just once in a room that finally understands you stayed as long as you could, and then did the decent thing and left. I roll the window down and I can smell the first breath the dirt takes after a long day, and I can hear in the middle distance where no one has paved over the truth of things, something like an old truck engine trying twice before it catches. I tell myself it's just the evening. I tell myself it's just the wind moving the mesquite or a dog calling to another dog. But deep down where the ledger sits in me, I know better. I know the night has a patient way of waiting just past the circle of light. And I know that some rooms keep their shape after the walls are gone. And I know that if I were to set a second cup on the counter again, the air would make room for it. I don't test it. I don't need to. I talk soft and keep my sentences short, and tend to the small things that will outlast me, like sweeping a porch and not stepping on the thresholds of rooms that aren't there anymore. If I look like a man who hears his name in the hush between the radio stations, that's because I am. And because it's not a bad thing to be on speaking terms with what doesn't raise its voice. Nights are wide out here, wider than even the map knows. And when the far-off thunder goes on its way, and the last truck takes the bridge and the dogs lie down in the yards where nobody asks them to justify themselves, I sit quiet and let the dark do its work. I keep my boots by the door. The thermos keeps its heat longer than you'd think. The screen door still creaks and finds its place again. And whatever stood just inside the air in room 7, and whatever learned to say my name through a radio that belonged to the weather, stands somewhere nearby under no roof at all, close enough to keep me from stepping straight under the light, close enough to remind me that quiet isn't empty, and that a man can carry company without insisting it show its face. I don't have a lesson for you. I have a feeling that hasn't left me. And if you've ever stood in a field after midnight and felt the world grow still around your shoulders, then you know the shape of it already. And you know why I speak low when I say that I lived a long time in a place that learned my voice, and that I left it the way I found it, with the door closed gently and the light switched off, and something unseen and heavy waiting just outside the porch, not asking for anything I couldn't give. My name is Ellis McCraw, and I'm from Quanah, Texas. I'm saying that plain because it matters where a thing starts, and for me it starts with a simple place and a life that never felt big enough to write down, until I had too much quiet to think in. I've still got the old porch light that hums when the night comes on, the kind that draws moths like they're old friends stopping by, and I still take my coffee out back in a dented thermos that's been with me longer than most folks I worked beside. The screen door leans a little and complains each time I ease it open, and I swear that sound is the first music I heard after my wife passed, because the house had gone too still, and that little creak meant something in the world was willing to speak to me. There are boots by the door I don't wear much anymore. Dust settled in the seams like it chose them for a home, and the night around here carries the easy talk of far dogs and the close whisper of mesquite when a breeze slides through. If you were on this porch, you'd smell rain in the dirt even on a dry week, because it stays tucked down there. And you'd hear the cicadas that never seem to tire, and you'd see how the highway glow is a suggestion more than a light. The world after midnight stretching out like a slow breath. I worked county maintenance most my life. The kind of job where your hands remember the same tools year after year and the road knows your name even if the folks driving it never do. I ran a grader when we needed shaping, and a brush truck when the mesquite got bold, and when the creek put red clay where pavement should have been, I was the one they called to set the signs and wave the traffic past. All that sounds steady when I say it, but it sits on a quiet that got louder after my wife left me for a world that doesn't hurt. And in that quiet, I started to turn over old nights the way a man turns over bolts in a coffee can, touching their shapes to see which one still fits. What I'm about to tell you is one of those nights, and I mean to tell it clean, like I'm handing you the wrench I used, not asking you to admire it, just to feel the weight of it in your palm. It was one of those winters that's more gray than cold, a season that smelled like wet canvas and iron, and the county had us checking culverts after a slow mist settled in for days. I drove a faded green pickup with a toolbox across the back and a cracked vinyl bench that made you sit crooked. And the radio was a little AM set that lost stations when you rounded low hills, then found them again like a shy dog. There was a creek we always watched east of Hardeman, a shallow thing in summer but a quick one when the sky decided to empty itself a little, and there was an old bridge out there, wooden deck and iron trusses, that had been retired in favor of new concrete not a quarter-mile upstream. They left the old one standing for tractors and for decisions no one wanted to pay to argue about. I liked that old bridge. It was a place that told the truth about weight and time. You could hear your tires talk to it, and the boards would give a soft protest that felt like an old man changing chairs. The drizzle had been playing it rain all afternoon, and I remember the smell of damp cedar in my cab because I kept a little block of it in the ashtray, a trick my father swore kept the air from going sour. I had a fresh pour in my thermos from the gas station off 287, where the coffee tastes like they'd seasoned the pot with every morning since Reagan, and I carried a stack of handwritten inspection slips and a pencil that left a thick, honest line. I was heading toward the old bridge more out of habit than marching orders. The new bridge had warning signs and reflectors that would flash your headlights back at you, but the old one sat crooked to the road and swallowed light like it was tired of bright things. I turned onto the narrow lane, tires lifting a little rooster tail of wet grit from the shoulder, and the pines that had no business being as tall as they were in this part of the state leaned over like they were studying me. The AM radio gave me a farm report from somewhere that didn't sound local, a voice about hog futures fading under the static, then a hymn from a church broadcast that had to be 50 miles south, thin and sweet. That's the sound I had when I eased up to the old bridge and put my window down and let the wet air come in on my face. The boards looked darker than usual, soaked to the point where the grain rose like the backs of sleeping animals, and water ran in a thin thread along each side, heading for the creek that whispered underneath. I killed the engine and listened to the place breathe. I can give you all the small things because they're what I remember first. The porch light at the far ranch place across the field had that faint yellow hum, same as mine. A pair of boots sat in my passenger floorboard from a day when I'd brought the new kid out, and he'd left them by mistake. I kept meaning to get them back to him. The thermos cap had a nick from where it fell off a tailgate back in August, There was a little tear in the seat that looked like the outline of a fish. The pencil was warm from writing in my pocket. You collect details like that when you're making your living in quiet, when there's no one to tell you what matters. I got out slow because the deck can be slick in a mist, and the boards gave that soft complaint under my weight that always made me feel welcome. I walked the length of it with my flashlight down low, the beam a modest thing in the wetness, catching on nails that had heaved a little, and on new footprints I knew were mine from earlier in the week, and on older ones that had widened with the weather until they were more like stains than marks. There's a spot halfway where the truss bolts up and the wood dips a little, and I paused there because I always do. Because when you stand in that dip, the creak sound jumps a notch and you feel like you're being counted. I wrote my notes: surface wet, nails fair, guard beam tipping, usual, and I tapped the rail like I was checking on it. And I told the bridge out loud that it had another season in it if it wanted one. Same way you talk to a dog in the evening when you're both settling and trying not to admit you're lonely. That's when I noticed the trucks. Not the ones on the new bridge. I could see their light glide through the fog when they came. Two bright lines that lifted and dropped like the slow blink of a tired thing. But my trucks, county trucks, parked down along the little track that used to lead to the river past your gate. We don't usually leave county rigs out where folks can get at them. And anyway, I knew they weren't there when I turned down the lane. I would have seen them. They sat nice and square, tailgates lined like a row of chairs, and their running lights breathed a soft red like they do when a door's cracked or a switch isn't settled right. I counted 2, then 3. I knew each of those trucks. I knew the dent under the right taillight on one from where someone backed into a post the winter before. I knew the toolbox on another because I'd welded the hinge pin myself. They looked like they were asleep and trying to decide if they'd wake up. I walked back off the bridge slow, not scared, not then, just careful in the way a man is when he comes upon something that isn't the way he left it. The drizzle ticked at my hat and ran down my collar. The air smelled like rain and old wood and that metal smell creeks have when they're thinking of getting serious. I reached the first truck and put my hand on the bed rail to steady myself, and it was cold. Colder than it had a right to be. I peered at the cab. Nobody in it. Keys hanging from the column. The little plastic tag we tie on swinging very gently, though there was not enough wind down there to do that. The second truck had a clipboard on the seat, my handwriting on the top sheet. And the door was shut but not latched all the way. Just kissing the catch, and a bit of the dome light was trying to come on and giving up and trying again. I knocked on the window with my knuckle and told myself that if anyone was napping, they ought to wake and tell me what the devil they were doing. But there was only my breath fogging the glass, and under that something I could not name. It's a feeling that has no reason to assure anyone who hears it, but I'll say it anyway. I felt known. I felt looked at in the way you look at a tool you've used for years, with a kind of ownership that's not proud and not unkind, but quiet and settled, like an agreement had been signed long ago, and I'd been too busy to notice. I climbed up into the first truck, and the seat was dry and cold and smelled like wiper fluid and the faint sweet of the cedar block we sometimes tuck under the dash. The radio was off. The keys were in, but when I turned them, the engine turned over like it was under a blanket. It did not catch. I don't mean it failed to start. I mean it chose not to. I sat there with my hand on the key and my heart doing a hard, slow knock that I could count like steps. I looked up, and in the mirror, where there should have been only the old bridge and the mist and the pines beyond, I saw the glow of a porch light I know as well as I know my own hands. A soft circle of yellow on a door that sits a little crooked in its frame, with one moth doing a patient orbit, the same way it does at my place most nights. I blinked and it was the creek again, the reflection of my own flashlight caught on the wet iron. I told myself the cold had got under my shirt and into my head, which can happen to a man when the day goes gray in all directions. But even as I said that, I knew it wasn't only that. The third truck had my name on the work order sitting on the dash. Ellis, it said. You're crooked E, you're patient L, the S you never learned to make the way teachers wanted. Beneath it, the location line read Bridge, Old East, and then below that another line I don't write, the one where the clerk types in the address for the file. It was my home address in Quanah, down to the little note that the mailbox leans and the gate drags, a note only someone who'd brought something to my door would add. I put my hand on the paper to steady it, and the paper felt too warm, like it had sat in a patch of sun that didn't exist. I spoke my name out loud because my father taught me you speak your name out loud when you start to drift. It puts you back in your chair. The drizzle thickened into something that wasn't quite rain and wasn't fog either. A wetness that moved on its own patience. And out of that wetness, I heard a sound that wasn't the creak and wasn't the small ticks engines make when they cool. It was a pencil moving across paper in a measured way. A line being laid down that someone had decided on long before they found the page. That's the best I can say. I stood there with my hand on the open door of a truck I had driven 100 times, and I felt the world tilt in a way only I could notice. And I knew that if I stood there long enough, I'd see a figure come out of that mist and go about his work without looking at me. Opening one toolbox, closing another. Walking the bridge with a light held low, touching each rail like he was greeting an old dog and checking the boards for give. He'd be my height. He'd have my old coat on. He'd smell like coffee and damp cedar in the rain that lays its hands on everything. He'd look up and past me, not at me, and he'd nod at something I could not see. And when he reached for the clipboard, he'd write my name in that same slanted hand. The only reason I didn't stay and learn whether that was true is smaller than any prideful explanation I could give you. My thermos was in my own truck, the faded green one up by the bridge, and I wanted the ordinary weight of it in my hand the way a man wants the handle of his front door after a long trip. I closed the door on the county truck and the dome light side and went out like it had been waiting to. I walked back up toward the old bridge and the boards greeted me with their familiar talk. And in the yellow circle of my own headlamps, I could see my pickup sitting where I put it, a little steam lifting off the hood in thin ribbons. I got in, took the thermos, poured into the cap, and held the warmth close to my mouth. The radio surrendered a station from Amarillo long enough for someone to read the weather. Cold drizzle overnight, possible freezing in low spots, watch your bridges, and then it slipped away. I sat with the engine running and decided I had checked enough for one evening. I wrote the inspection note in bigger letters than I needed, as if I was trying to convince someone later that I'd been certain. I put the truck in gear and turned to look back down the lane. The 3 county trucks sat where they were, patient, steady, their red running lights breathing like sleeping animals, and behind them the mist made a wall that would not be hurried or parted by any small act of mine. On the way out, the new bridge threw my headlights back and the concrete sang the low note it always does when your tires find the joints. I kept my speed steady, hands light on the wheel, and the world narrowed down to the 2 clean lines of the road and the small honest space I could see. Past the turn, a little motel with a flickering sign put its name into the gray, and one room had a light on though the rest were dark. I caught a person moving behind a thin curtain, the shape of a life I'd never know, and I felt that ache I always feel. The one that comes when you realize the world is full of rooms where people pour their coffee and set down their keys and make small decisions you'll never hear about. I went home the long way so the heater could dry the damp at my collar. The porch light hummed when I pulled in, and it gave me the feeling it always has. The feeling that my place remembers me, even if I've been gone long enough to forget myself a little. The screen door creaked. I set the thermos on the counter and wiped the neck with a towel out of habit, because my wife used to fuss about the ring it could leave. The AM radio in the kitchen offered a hymn from a station I don't usually catch, a thin thing that made the room feel like a church before a funeral. Not sad exactly, just arranged. I sat at the table with the inspection slips and the pencil and the cup, and the pencil left its honest line where I told it to and refused to leave a mark where I did not. And I knew right then that I would not tell anyone at the yard about the trucks in the mist. Not because I was afraid they'd laugh. You get old enough and the value of being believed goes down while the value of keeping a thing whole goes up. I went to bed with the radio on low, tuned to the farm report that only ever comes in right when the weather has a mind of its own, and I slept until I didn't. In the hush that comes 2 hours before dawn, when the highway goes empty and a man can hear his own house decide which way it wants to settle, I woke from a dream that was not like other dreams. I was standing on my porch with the clipboard under my arm, and the porch light was humming and a paper waited on the top clip. It wasn't an inspection slip. It was one of those forms the delivery folks use when you sign for a parcel, the kind with the line where your hand goes in the tiny letters that say, "Accepted by." The wind moved against my shirt and I could smell rain on dirt. That good smell that says everything is new for 5 minutes, and when I lifted the pen, the line already had my name on it in the shape only my hand makes. I didn't sign it in the dream. I set the pen down and held my hands together because I felt if I touched the paper, I'd be touching some old agreement I had no memory of making, but had been living under all the same. A knock came at the screen door in the dream. Not loud, polite, like a neighbor who doesn't want to wake the house. I don't remember opening it. I remember knowing someone was there and not needing to see. When I woke for real, the radio had slipped into static and the heater had clicked off and the porch light hummed like a content insect. I went to the door and put my hand on the frame that always sits a little out of true, and I stood there until I could tell I was breathing from my belly and not from my throat. The next morning, I took the old road again because it was on my route, and because I've never been able to look away from a thing that puzzles me. The lane was empty. No county trucks. No tracks where there hadn't been. The mist had drifted off somewhere else, probably to tell another creek it was time to get busy. The boards on the old bridge had dried out a shade or two and their old voices were back when I walked them. The unbothered whine and groan that says we're here, we're holding, we know how. I stood in the little dip halfway and listened for the pencil scratch that wasn't a pencil scratch. And I heard only creak and wind in the pines and the far-off bark of dogs that must have found something to agree about. I wrote what needed writing and left the rest unwritten. I still drive out there sometimes when the weather has that patient way of not ending, and the AM radio keeps losing its nerve. The motel sign flickers. One room is often lit when the others are not. I pass the field with the porch light in the distance, and I keep my eyes on the road because when you age into your nights, you learn that not everything kind enough to show itself deserves to be stared at. My boots by the door keep their dust. My thermos keeps its heat if I remember to twist the lid right. The screen door keeps its small song. And when the gray hours come and the world is wide and empty like a sheet of paper you're not sure belongs to you, I sit at this table with the pencil my hand knows and I write the things it's safe to write. Like culvert clear and guard beam fair and surface swept, and I leave off the line that would try to name the other part. The part where the mist arranges county trucks that hold memories you haven't lived yet. The part where a porch light glows in a place it has no right to be. And you recognize your own door in the reflection on a creek. The part where someone sets a form in front of you, and your name is already waiting. You ever get that feeling someone's there, even when you can't see them? That's how it felt that night and most nights since, not frightening, just old and sure. Like the land itself is keeping attendance and marking who passes and when. I'm not asking you to believe anything that would keep you up. I'm telling you that the world after midnight has its own kind of ledger. And sometimes it brings it by your porch and lets you hear the pencil moving. And sometimes it nudges your trucks into a neat line down by the water. So you'll know it's not just loneliness arranging things. And sometimes it reminds you with a humming lamp and a soft knock that you have always been expected. I don't know what would have happened if I'd signed that line in my dream. I don't know what would have happened if I'd stayed by those trucks long enough to watch that man with my height and my coat and my habits do his evening rounds. I know only that when I pass the old bridge now, I roll the window down no matter the weather and let the smell of wet wood and iron come in. And I tell it as plain as I told you that I'm still here. I'm still counting and I hear you. Most days the bridge says nothing back and that's fine by me. On others, when the cloud ceiling sits low and the fields go quiet and the motel light holds steady in a single window, I'll catch that other sound again, faint as a moth's wing, the pencil across a page I cannot see. I slow down a little then, not out of fear but out of manners, and I let the truck roll past without hurrying, and I carry the small weight of understanding that some old, patient thing has always been just beyond the light and always will be, whether or not I ever put my name where it's been written for me.